Good morning, everyone. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the meeting on innovation and social cohesion. My name is Jimena Concha, Executive Director of the Interdisciplinary Center for Public Policies from the University Alberto Hurtado. This hub of the innovation that we have called Social Policies in the Face of Transition, which is an initiative of the social policy areas of the Euro-Social Program from the European Union, developed together with the Interdisciplinary Center for Public Policies from the Universidad Alberto Hurtado. This is an entity which aims at increasing the participation of the university in the creation of public policies with the social commitment and ethics of the Jesuit university in our country. Eurosocial is a cooperation program from the European Union with Latin America that promotes public policies to reduce inequalities and to improve the social cohesion in Latin American countries and in the region overall. Eurosocial is put in place by a number of institutions that comprise the Italian and Latin American Association, which is organizing this event as the area of social policies, the International Foundation and for Ibero-America of Administration of Public Policies, Expertise France, and the Secretariat of the Central American Social Integration, CISCA. On behalf of those organizations, everyone be welcome to this event. The Hub of Social Innovation and Cohesion for Social Policies in the Face of Transition is a digital space that will make available different instances, workshops, panels, different publications from experts, as well as other input in 3 specific areas which are today mandatory in the development of social policies all over the world: the ecological transition, the transformations of the world of labor, and the development of care societies. In this context, we are here kicking off the seminar that we have called for an eco-social transition, Euro-Latin American dialogue on the challenges of social policies in the ecological transition. The first of a number of seminars that will take place today in Santiago, on Friday in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and on Tuesday the 26th in San Jose, Costa Rica. And the topics will revolve around the care systems and the different challenges in the world of labor, respectively. Having this context, we want to welcome the authorities that are joining us today. First of all, Francisca Perales, Undersecretary of Social Services from the Ministry of Social Development and Family; Giorgio Boccardo, Undersecretary of Labor from the Ministry of Labor and Social Provision from Chile; and Ewout Sandker, Chief of the Cooperation Area from the European Union Delegation; Antonella Cavallari, General Secretary of the Italian American Institute; Enrique O'Farrill, Executive Director of the Chilean Agency of International Cooperation for the Development; and also Fabio Verdranu, Director of the Office of the International Labor Organization for the Southern Cone in Latin America; Eduardo Saavedra, Dean of the School of Economy and Business from the University Alberto Hurtado, and also Chair of the Center for Public Policies of our university; the different public authorities, heads of services that are joining us today, public officials, members of unions, business people, students, members of the academia, and everyone joining us today through the different digital platforms from Eurosocial and also UHTV Digital. We want to invite you to download the final program for the activity from the website of this initiative, plazasocial.eu, which is precisely our digital platform that will not only be available during the days in which we are having the different events, but it will be available throughout the year for it to be actually a hub or a repository of resources where everyone who is interested in keeping up with this topic, making different contributions and supporting the issue of global transitions are able to find there a set of useful resources for these activities. Now we are going to kick off the first panel of the morning, and it will be moderated by the academic director of the Interdisciplinary Center on Public Policies. Is that correct? I'm sorry, apologies. Apologies, I was skipping ahead of myself. We are live, it happens, and now I'm going to give the floor to the authorities, which is very important, of course. And first of all, I would like to give the floor to the Undersecretary of Social Services from the Ministry of Social Development and Family, Francisca Perales, who will address the audience. The floor is yours. Can you hear me, everyone? Hi, first of all, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. For us, from the ministry, there is 4 women leading the ministry at this moment, and for us it's a pleasure to be part of initiatives where the key topic is social cohesion. Throughout the month and a half in which we have been in the administration, we have had debates regarding the strategic lines that the Ministry of Social Development should have, because it is a ministry that coordinates the implementation of social policies in the country. So, in that sense, to talk about social cohesion as a pillar that guides social policies in Chile is fundamental for us. And we have been debating that one of the most important strategies for the ministry to work on is precisely how to create a welfare state where social policies are guided by social cohesion to generate collective welfare and to be able to adapt ourselves to the challenges of the 21st century when the water scarcity crisis and the climate crisis are things that are also affecting inequalities among people living in the different territories. So from that perspective, for us, as I said it earlier, it is very valuable to be able to participate in these initiatives, and we are available to continue to do so. So we thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you, Eurosocial. And also, on behalf of the ministry and the minister, I want to greet the authorities, the ambassador of the European Union, the General Secretary of the Italian American Institute, the Executive Director of the Chilean Agency of Cooperation for Development, also the university and all the organizations who are participating today. Having said that, I would like to add that uh, the care system is part of the dialogues that will take place, that the national care system and the implementation of a national care system is one of the priority pillars for the administration of President Boric. That national care system, as we understand, is a huge challenge because it requires to create a new pillar of social welfare which allows us to work on different models of our economy, different ways of organizing ourselves, understanding that people who care for others have to be able to exert their rights and to move out of the private world where they live. So we have to work on that instead of just improving what we already have in place. We have more or less 16 programs in place at the moment that somehow relate to the care system, but they have different objectives and they don't necessarily engage with one another, and they don't consider the 4 areas which are related to care, which are children and teenagers, people with disabilities, people who care, elderly citizens, and I would prefer to say women who care for others, because 70% of people who care for others are women, and most of them are doing it together with housework, which is unpaid, and that requires even greater articulation. And why am I highlighting this? Because we understand that we have to improve the existing offer, and also we have to put in place a care system that is cross-sectional, which is broader. And we have talked about this with the Undersecretary of Labor, and it requires a broader outlook, a broader strategy, instead of just being the Ministry of social development. And it requires organization between the different ministries of the government, and it also requires cooperation with organizations of the civil society, with different social organizations, looking at international experiences in different countries and cities. We've been working on that, and also one of the key challenges is that the care system needs to be adapted to the climate crisis, precisely because in the areas where there is a water scarcity, in the territories where their ways of living are changing, they also require social policies to be adapted to that, instead of just looking at it from the perspective of the cities, the capitals, and or the capitals of the regions. They need to have local territorial perspectives to make sense of them. So we are always available to continue with the conversation. We are going to be putting in place an executive committee in collaboration with different ministries to work on the national care system, and we are highly interested in having a dialogue with international organizations, with the academia, with universities, with social organizations, and so on and so forth. So we are going to be working on that, and we look forward to see you then. Thank you. Thank you so much for the words of Francisca Perales, Undersecretary of Social Services. And now we want to give the floor to the Undersecretary of Labor, Giorgio Boccardo. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to this uh, panels of conversations on fair transitions. Thank you, Undersecretary Francisca Perales. Also, Ewot Sandker from the delegation of the European Union, Antonella Cavallari from the Italian Latin American Institute, Enrique O'Farrell, Director of the Chilean Agency of International Cooperation for Development, also Fabio Vertranu, Director of the ILO, Mr. Moreno, Vice Deputy Chair of the Union Organization and also Dean of the School of Economy and Business of the university. Without a doubt, as a country and as a society, we are facing one of the most important challenges of our history as humankind. The climate change, the crisis, the need to incorporate a feminist outlook, to be concerned with the creation of decent labor, to guarantee that the transitions that the planet and the country need are fair, is a challenge that we all must face. As a state, as a government, as a ministry, we share these principles and challenges. They are part of our program, they are part of our commitments to the citizens, and therefore, as a country and as a government, we are committed to these changes, which is why, for us, any cooperation with international entities, with the European community, are key. Also with public universities that make a contribution towards putting the topics on the table, and also to allow us to find solutions that somehow tackle how complex the issues are. In that sense, as Ministry of Labor, we feel it is key, and we are working on it, and soon enough we are going to be reporting on certain progress we have made. The fair transitions are key, and for that we need a national policy of labor intermediation. These transitions have different complexities because, first of all, we have communities in the different territories that are paying the cost of unsustainable development, but also there is a labor force related to the transitions. First of all, we want to move towards guaranteeing that there are tools available to accompany the transition. We also need to train people to put in place the capabilities to promote new energies, new technologies, and also transformations in the industry. On the other side, we also have to address labor groups that are many times left out of the transition, that prevent the transitions from being fair. And in that sense, as a government, we also have to make sure that the groups, that the labor force that many times are left out of technological changes and social environmental changes are able to be part of the labor market once again. And we feel it is key to incorporate the regional outlook. Many times the transitions have to do with shutting down different energy plants, ports that are not easily relocated elsewhere. In that sense, the regional perspective and the decentralization policies are key. In this transition, we also have to close existing gaps in the labor market, gender gaps, age gaps, and also different inequalities that happen with different nationalities. In that sense, as a government, we want to accompany with the tools of labor training and with the tools of the ministry to incorporate new skills into the labor force with a perspective of feminism and a regional perspective, and also to look at those groups that many times, because of their age and because of their skills, have a harder time being part of the transitions. We must not leave anyone behind, and as a ministry, we are committed to this agenda and to the changes, and we are convinced that it is a responsibility of everyone, of the state, of the government, of the international entities, and also of the public education entities, in order to move forward with employers, employees, and unions to create agreements that allow us to move towards these goals and not to leave anyone behind. So as a ministry, we are highly committed to this. We congratulate you for the initiative, and you can definitely count on us to accompany the transformations from the design of public policies on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Undersecretary Giorgio Boncardio. And now you'll hear Ewot Sanke. Good morning, everybody. Mrs. Francisca Perales, Undersecretary of Social Services, Mr. Ricardo, Undersecretary of Labor, Madame Antonella Cavalleri, General Secretary of the Italo-Latin American Institute, my dear friend Enrique Farrell, Executive Director, ladies and gentlemen, to the Director of the ILO, everybody who joins us from Europe and Latin America. It pleases me to be at the opening of this seminary for the Eurosocial program that has been working for the past 15 years in this transfer of information between Europe and Latin America. This seminary is most timely because the transition in terms of energy is speeding up. The Russian delegation in Ukraine tells us that in Europe we will accelerate very much this energy transfer. This leads to results. It will impact severely on the import hydrocarbons, and Chile is an excellent candidate to forge a cooperation with the European Union. If we look at the heading of this event and we focus on the social politics in global transitions, we realize that these are urgent, critical, and strategic because they place us particularly in reaching agreements to achieve policies that are fair and green, considering what is happening in the planet, considering all that is happening in the world, it might be very critical to make the right policies in terms of social, the climate change, and the well-being of people. It is imperative for all countries. In the EU, we are progressing in implementing the Green Deal. It is very ambitious. It seeks to build a greener, more inclusive, digital, and sustainable Europe in order to improve resilience in view of the climate crisis and to contribute to the changes post COVID. This is what we're talking about when referring to the Green Deal. This Europe needs to be more neutral and resilient and recover from all the climate change and everything happening. In Latin America, they are making progress to include all these initiatives in terms of the climate change, the social aspects, the climate strategies in the long term, and those for a just treatment. As the EU, in Chile, we have a different program called Euroclima, and this program is supporting the drafting of regional plans for climate policies, particularly in Magallanes, where we can produce green hydrogen. These regional plans will be prepared with considerable involvement and due consideration for the social, economical, and environmental aspects. We shall also consider if we might develop a tool, a prospective tool, by using our global observation system, Copernicus, that has cooperation programs with the universities in Chile, and this satellite information needs to be combined with other information for infrastructure, social economical aspect, environmental aspects, and so forth, in order to focus investments in the more adequate areas with fewer costs in terms of the social and environmental terms. In coming years, we'll invest heavily in cooperation in Chile with development of green hydrogen. We not only have to talk about the cost of energy transfer, but also about opportunities. When talking about green hydrogen, this new industry will generate new demand of labor, of specialized labor, and we are ready to help to support Chile with training programs, and this could be focused on vulnerable areas for maybe women, children, migrants, and thus use the opportunities to create. We also have a global program for just transfer. Chile is one of the countries that was chosen to partake in this program. Similarly, it is funding studies for just transfer in Chile. And what they have done is create a social economical baseline for the carbon print and what needs to be done for a just transfer. This global program will help to implement those transition programs. We need to propose innovations and responses that are able to preserve the well-being of people and also forge the triple sustainability that we're talking: social, economical, and environmental. This is the basis of our social program. This invitation is issued to share these challenges, but also to develop initiatives that help us go forth in these new policies and programs in this area. We need to find areas for cooperation and debate to incorporate ideas, initiatives in Europe and Latin America to implement this in the areas of social, economical, and environmental programs. Thank you. Best wishes for a good day. We thank the words of Ewart Sandker, Head of Cooperation of the EU delegation in Chile. We'll now hear from Antonella Cavalli, General Secretary of the Italo-Latin American Institute.
Muy buenos días. Saludo con mucho
Good
gusto a todas
morning.
las autoridades presentes, al director ejecutivo de la
I
Agencia Chilena de
greet
Cooperación
all the people
Internacional, al embajador
present,
de la Unión Europea en Chile,
particularly the
León de la
authorities
Torre, a los
from
representantes
Chile,
de la
the
OIT y, por
representatives
supuesto,
of
al
the
rector de la Universidad Alberto
ILO,
Hurtado, que
of the
tan
Latin American
generosamente hospeda este importante evento. Un
corporations, our
saludo
warmest
también a los
greetings.
importantes panelistas, a las personas presentes en Santiago y
We
a
greet
las que se
those who are working
conectan,
in
al igual que yo,
Santiago,
desde el espacio virtual. Era mi
whether
deseo viajar a
live,
Santiago,
in
además en esta nueva
presence,
fase
or
política a la que se
online.
está mirando con tanto interés en todo
We're
el mundo.
looking
Espero
with
volver
great
pronto a Chile y
interest
tener la
to what
oportunidad de
is being
encuentros
done there
en
and
persona,
look
sin
forward to
dudas
visiting you
irreemplazables.
in Chile in the near
Al inaugurar
future.
este seminario
When
sobre
opening
transición
this seminary
ecosocial,
about the
quiero
ecosocial
destacar su
seminar, I'd
mensaje
like to
principal.
highlight its main message
Verosímilmente, en los
of
próximos años,
in the coming
la humanidad
years,
seguirá
humanity
conociendo guerras,
it has been
emergencias,
seeing
nuevas
wars,
crisis,
emergencies, new
pero más
crises.
allá de
But
los
beyond all
acontecimientos que
the
nos tocarán de
events
suerte,
that
un factor
we
seguirá
see,
estructurando
we
nuestro
see
mundo,
how the
la
world is
crisis
structuring
ecológica.
our world,
Lo que
particularly
está en
the
juego es
ecological
la posibilidad de las
crisis.
generaciones
What is
futuras de contar con un planeta en
in
equilibrio
the balance
y
here
vivir
is
bien,
how to
en
live in
armonía con
this
la
world
Pachamama, como dicen los andinos.
in harmony with the
Haber
Pachamama,
subordinado
as the
durante
local
milenios la naturaleza a los
people
fines
say.
humanos, tratándola como materia prima,
We
como
can
medio, como
consider the
recurso,
earth as
ha invertido la posición jerárquica,
of
de cierto modo.
how we
En
source
otras
our raw
palabras, el
materials.
peligro ya no
But
viene
the
de las fuerzas
danger
de la
isn't just
naturaleza.
from the forces
El
of nature.
peligro
The
viene
danger
en el
comes
inmenso
from
poder
in the large
alcanzado por la
power
humanidad para
achieved by
dominarlas.
mankind to
Hemos llegado a
dominate
extremos
Earth.
destructivos
We have
ya
reached
intolerables.
destructive levels that are
Así,
cannot
la
be
que llamamos
tolerated.
transición
So what we
ecológica
call
no
the
es una reforma
ecological
parcial, un
transition, the
cambio
green
nada más
transition,
en un
isn't
sector
just
específico,
a small
sino una
change. It is
transformación
a
radical que
radical
afecta
transformation that
todos los
affects
ámbitos de la vida
all
humana
areas
y, por
of
tanto,
human
todas
life
las
and
políticas
therefore
públicas.
all public
La
policies.
urgencia es generar un
The
nuevo modo de
urgency
producir y
lies in
consumir.
create
Se
new
trata de
ways
pasar a
of
nueva
using
fase
and
de la historia
consuming. We need to
humana
move
que
forward
permita
in
desacoplar
human
el
history
crecimiento
to
y el consumo de
separate
recursos naturales.
growth and
La
development and the
pregunta
use
inspiradora de
of
este seminario
natural
es, ¿qué
resources.
tiene que
This
hacer el
seminar is focused
sistema de
on what
bienestar
has
social?
does the
¿Cuál es su
social
rol, su
welfare
posición, su
have
contribución
to do?
específica a esta
What is
gran
its role,
transición
its
ecológica?
contribution
Además de
towards
ayudar
this
a las personas
transition,
que se
besides helping people
verán
that
perjudicadas
might
por
be
la transición, porque
harmed
ya
by
sabemos
transition,
que
because
habrán
we know
perdedores.
there will be some losers
¿Cuáles
and winners,
deben ser sus
we need to know
prioridades,
which are the
sus nuevas
priorities,
estrategias
the new
para ser parte
strategies
activa del proceso de
to
transición?
carry forward this green
Estas preguntas
transition.
son
These
cruciales si
questions
tenemos
are
en cuenta el
crucial when
rol
we're
de las
considering the
políticas
role of
sociales
social
para combatir
policies
las
to
desigualdades y
fight
construir sociedades
inequalities and create
resilientes.
resilient
Para tener una idea de su
societies.
magnitud, el
To have an
compacto
idea
social
of
en
this
Europa,
magnitude,
o sea, la
the
suma
impact
de
of
protección
this in
social,
Europe in the
salud,
social,
educación,
education,
significa el
well-being
35% del Producto Interno Bruto
considers
y el
35% of the gross
66%
national
del
low
gasto público.
product and
Estoy segura
a
de
large
que las
percentage of
discusiones de hoy
public expenditure.
contribuirán a
So what we
delinear
hear
respuestas concretas a
today
estas
will
preguntas.
lead to some
Yo confío en la
resources,
experiencia y
and
sabiduría de
I
los panelistas.
trust
Para
in
la
the
isla, este
experience
seminario
of
tiene
the speakers.
mucha relevancia. En
This
primer lugar,
seminar is
nuestra
very
organización
relevant
ha hecho
because
de la
our
sostenibilidad ambiental un eje central.
organization has focused
Toda nuestra
primarily
agenda
on
está sesgada a
these
la cuestión de la
social
sostenibilidad. No
areas and
solo es un objetivo como
sustainabilities,
tal, sino también una
not just
dimensión
as
que
a
permea nuestras
dimension
acciones en
that
diferentes
percolates
campos,
all our
como la igualdad
areas,
de
for instance,
género, la
gender
cohesión
equality,
social,
social
las pymes.
cohesion,
En
small and
segundo
medium
lugar,
scale
con este seminario
companies.
nos
So this
encaminamos a
seminar
culminar
is
la
leading
fase actual
towards
del
the
programa
current
europeo
phase of the European
Eurosocial
program,
y
Eurosocial.
tratamos de hacerlo de la mejor
And we
manera,
try to do
con
it
una
as best as we
mirada hacia el
can,
futuro,
looking towards the
orientada al futuro,
future
y en
and
particular a los
particularly to
desafíos
the
de innovación
challenges
de las
and
políticas de
innovation
bienestar
of
social ante
social
los grandes
policies in
cambios que
view of the
estamos
large
viviendo en
changes
América
that we're
Latina y
experiencing
Europa.
in Latin America and in
El
Europe.
Seminario de Santiago
The
es el
Santiago
primero
seminar is the
de un
first
ciclo de
of a
encuentros
series of
euro-latinoamericanos
Euro-Latin American
dedicados al papel de
meetings
las
dedicated
políticas
to the
sociales
role
en
of
el escenario de
social
las grandes
policies in the
transiciones
scenarios of
globales.
large
En
global
los próximos
transitions.
días
In the coming
estaremos en
days,
Buenos
we'll be in
Aires con
Buenos
una
Aires
iniciativa sobre
with an
sociedades de
initiative about
cuidados y la
societies
próxima
for
semana en San
care,
José de Costa Rica,
and in the future
alrededor
we'll
de
be
las
in Costa
grandes
Rica,
transformaciones del
talking
mundo del
about the
trabajo.
large
Les
transformation
invito
in
desde ya a
the work
conectarse y
environment.
participar online.
I invite you to
Este
connect
tríptico de
to
seminario
this
es indicador de
other
las
meetings.
direcciones
This
hacia las
triptych
cuales es
is
imprescindible
looking
trabajar.
towards the
Es
changes that
una
we
hoja
need
de
to carry
ruta
forward.
para
It's a
los
roadmap
decisores de
to
políticas
those who
públicas que la
to the
isla quiere
decision
contribuir a
makers, those
empujar
who carry
junto con los
forth public
proyectos de
policies. We
cooperación
need
que
to work
venimos
together
actuando en muchos países de la región para
as we
favorecer
have
la
in different
cohesión social.
countries to move forward in
De
the
hecho,
social
yo pienso es
aspects.
necesario
I believe it is
acompañar
necessary
las
to work
ideas
together
con ejemplos.
in
Es
ideas
necesario
and
unir
examples. We need
propuestas de
to join
políticas con proyectos
propositions
demostrativos
with these
de los
social
beneficios que
areas,
se
with the
pueden
policies that
adquirir a
will
través de
talk about
determinadas
the
opciones
benefits that can
políticas.
be achieved through these
Futuro,
social,
innovación
economic, and
y
environmental
cohesión
policies.
social
So
son palabras clave
we are
del
talking about
compromiso de
key
trabajo de la
words
isla.
in the
Son
commitment
también
towards working
expresiones de un
together
ideario
and
común,
the
de un
expressed
espacio de
ideas that are
entendimiento
shared
y
in the
colaboración
terms
entre
of
Europa y América
cooperation
Latina.
in Latin
Ojalá
America and
sean
Europe.
las bases de
Hopefully,
una
they are the
nueva
basis for
fase
a
de
new
Eurosocial,
phase in
este buen
Eurosocial
programa que nos
areas, this
permite
program that
estrechar
helps us
lazos birregionales
create
en torno a
bonds
tantos
between
beneficios.
bridges and the
La imprevista
benefits.
pandemia,
This
guerra en Europa
pandemic, the
nos
war
deja
in
en
Europe,
evidencia nuestras
shows that
fragilidades,
we are
allí donde
fragile,
menos lo
where we
esperábamos.
did not
Pandemia y
expect it.
guerra hasta
Pandemics
hace
and
poco
war,
nos
until
parecían
a
citas
short
de un
while
tiempo
ago,
remoto,
seemed to
superado.
be
No es
something
así.
of the past, but it
Sin
is not
embargo,
so.
son también tragedias como
These are
estas que
tragedies
deben
such as these that
impulsarnos
need
a
to
fortalecer la
boost
alianza entre Europa
the
y América
alliance between
Latina,
Europe and Latin
alimentándola
America,
con nuevos
to feed
contenidos,
it with new
construyendo nuevas
content, to build
oportunidades.
new
El
opportunities.
éxito del nuevo
The
pacto
success
verde
of this new
se
Green
medirá en
Deal will
función
be
de su
measured in
capacidad
terms
de
of the
formular un
capacity
pacto
of
social más justo,
formulating
en un
more
contexto
fairer
en el que la máquina de creación de
policies, so the
desigualdades sigue siendo
machinery of
formidablemente eficiente.
inequalities is
Es
so
con esta
efficient.
esperanza que cierro mi
We
saludo
hope,
inaugural.
this is
Les
the
doy
hope
las
that I
gracias
express
y
in
les deseo
closing.
un
I wish
trabajo
you
muy
a
fructífero. Muchas
most
gracias.
fruitful work.
El saludo.
Thank you so much, Antonieta Sala, for your words. To close the opening session, I would like to give the floor to Enrique Ofarril, Executive Director of the Chilean Agency of International Cooperation for Development. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I want to welcome you to this regional meeting organized by the Eurosocial Plus program of the EU. I want to start by greeting the authorities, the Undersecretary of Social Services from the Ministry of Social Development and Family, Francisca Perales, Undersecretary of the Ministry of Labor, Mr. Giorgio Bocardo, our friend Ewout Sandker from the area of cooperation of the European Union delegation in Chile, the General Secretary of the Latin American Institute, Mrs. Antonella Cavallari. Likewise, I would like to greet the rector of the university, Mr. Eduardo Silva, and also he is not here, but he will join us remotely, but he is a friend of Chile, Mr. Francesco Chiodi, coordinator of the Eurosocial Plus program. The cooperation relationships between Chile and the European Union are going through a great moment. As cooperation partners, we have an agenda that supports both the national development as well as the regional development. Also regional in Chile, but regional as Latin America, more specifically in the framework of the triangular cooperation. A key pillar of the cooperation between Chile and the EU are the regional programs. Among those, more specifically, Eurosocial, because of how long it has lasted. Let's remember that Eurosocial has been going on in Chile for 15 years now, and also due to its impact and sustainability. Eurosocial, and in its latest version, Eurosocial Plus, which is not the latest, which is not the last, because we know that there will be a new version, but in the current Eurosocial Plus version, it has been a huge support, there is no doubt, to the development of more inclusive social policies that are also more equitable and democratic, allowing the exchange of good practices with experts from Europe that make a contribution with their experience and also with training to have a positive impact towards the changes that Chile needs to move towards a more sustainable and inclusive development. Latin America and Chile specifically are going through changes that will have an impact over the economy, the productive means, the environment, and society overall. It gets more and more important and more necessary to consider horizontality and social inclusion as the basis for social development, involving local communities and the civil society, guiding the public policies towards an approach of more sustainable consumption and production. International cooperation has a key role to play because it is through the exchange of experiences and mutual learning as well as dialogue that we are able to create a bridge between different regions to propose innovative solutions that to support our way into sustainable development, which is a challenge for the entire region of Latin America and the Caribbean. With this objective, and as a national focal point of the Eurosocial program, the Chilean Agency of International Cooperation for Development congratulates you and celebrates this seminar in Santiago, as well as the initiative, which is a hub of innovation and social cohesion, social policies in the face of global transitions. I am sure that the dialogue that will take place will be highly fruitful. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for the words of Enrique Farrell from AXI, and with his words, now we finalized the inauguration phase of our seminar, and now we are going to start with the first conversation panel. But I would like to tell you that we are not only going to listen to the experts and the dialogue that will happen between them, but also we have to engage in a dialogue with everyone in the room and also everyone who is joining us today online through our different platforms. So, in your binders, you have cards that will allow you to ask questions to the panel members. We are going to be collecting those questions in a way that at the end of the presentations and the dialogue that will take place among them, we are going to have a Q&A not only in this panel but also in the following panels as well. So we are going to take and answer the questions from the audience that is joining us today in person here as well as online. Okay, then let's introduce the first panel and let's give the floor to the moderator, who is going to be Eduardo Saavedra, Academic Director of the Interdisciplinary Center of Public Policies from the University Alberto Hurtado and currently Dean of the School of Economy and Business of our university. Eduardo, among many other things, is a PhD in economy from Cornell University in the US and also a very well-known academic, and he's been in the university for many years. Eduardo, the floor is yours for you to introduce us to our guests. Thank you so much. Please have a seat. We still are waiting for another panel member, I think. Okay, this person will be joining us online. Okay, great. Then I'm going to be sitting over here. Well, we want to welcome all of you to the first seminar and the first panel or conversation that we are going to have. I will be introducing now the panel members. And first of all, I will use my notes here. In this dialogue that we have called Progress and Limitations of the Eco-Social Transition, Contributions from Europe and Latin America, we have with us Sebastiano Sabato, who will be joining us remotely, and Dr. Sebastiano Sabato is a politologist and also main researcher of the European Social Observatory, which is an independent institute and a group of experts which is based on Brussels. His interests include socioeconomic governance in the European Union, compared social policies, and the socio-ecologic transition. And together with Matteo Mandelli, they will be the first speakers, and they will be introducing their work on the eco-social transition. Matteo Mandelli is a PhD candidate from the University of Milan and currently a visiting researcher in the University of Mainz. Formerly, he has collaborated with international panels of experts, including the European Social Center, the Institute for Unions, and also the Beltrinelli Institution. The main research line that he works on are socio-ecological policies in Europe. We also have Fabio Bertranu over here, who will give us the Latin American perspective to the transition. Fabio is the director or chair of the ILO office here for the Southern Cone, Latin America, and he is a PhD in economy from the University of Pittsburgh and a Master's of Arts in Economy of the University of Georgetown. And also he worked here in the university. We were classmates at some point in the past when our hair was not as gray as it is now. And he is also an economist from the Cuyo National University. Fabio, welcome home. His areas of research are the labor market, social security, and also pensions. He has worked in the areas of health economy and public finances. And finally, last but not least, of course, we have Astrid Becker, who is the director of the regional project Social and Ecologic Transformation in Latin America from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, representing the foundation in Peru, Sri Lanka, Mozambique, Green Cape, and also representing the foundation in Germany. Well, welcome everyone to the first dialogue. We are going to have the first presentation. So we have two speakers. They will have 10 minutes each. I hope they agree to that. And then we will hear Fabio and finally Astrid's presentation. And we will have a couple of minutes to take a few questions randomly from the audience, of course. And for that, you have received cards in your folders where you will be able to write your questions. And I am mostly going to be taking random cards and I will read out loud the questions. So now we're going to give the floor to Sebastiano and Mateo that will be offering their presentation remotely. Buenos días a todo el mundo desde Bruselas. Muchas gracias al profesor Saavedra por esa presentación y muchas gracias a los organizadores por habernos invitado a este interesante seminario. Dado que existen muchas cosas que debemos cubrir, brevemente presentaré por qué Mateo y yo estamos aquí para presentar los resultados de un estudio que viene de una fructífera colaboración entre el Observatorio Social Europeo y el programa Eurosocial. Hemos investigado entonces en este marco de trabajo si el mecanismo de recuperación y resiliencia, que es uno de los mayores mecanismos que tiene la Unión Europea para reaccionar ante la pandemia, si el instrumento tiene una dimensión socioecológica. Y la principal pregunta de investigación del estudio es ¿cuál es la dimensión socioecológica de la estrategia para recuperarse de la pandemia del COVID-19? Y también importante, cuáles son las funciones que deben desarrollar los estados de bienestar europeos en el contexto de la transición verde. Ahora, este estudio básicamente tiene que ver con la Unión Europea, pero en la perspectiva de este seminario vamos a presentar las iniciativas que han sido realizadas a nivel europeo para poder contrastarlas también con otras experiencias. Entonces, más adelante hablaremos acerca del mecanismo de recuperación y resiliencia, pero antes de esto, mi colega Matteo Mandelli va a presentar entonces el marco analítico para este estudio, cómo conjugar las dimensiones económicas, sociales y medioambientales para el desarrollo y compararlas con las diferentes iniciativas de la Unión Europea. En particular, esto es algo que ya se mencionaba antes. ¿Cuál es entonces el nuevo pacto verde de la Unión Europea? Mateo, por favor, el micrófono es tuyo. Sí, muchas gracias Sebastiano y muchas gracias también de mi parte hacia la organización por habernos invitado. Estoy feliz de estar aquí. Básicamente lo que ven ustedes son ciertos puntos que llamamos el trilema de crecimiento, ambiente, bienestar social. Básicamente son tres objetos en diferentes esferas. Tenemos el crecimiento económico, la protección social y la protección medioambiental. Y el punto principal del trilema es que estas esferas se encuentran interconectadas de manera tal que es inútil tratarlas de manera aislada. Por lo tanto, el trilema nos apunta al rol de la política al intentar reconciliar estos tres objetivos, que no siempre es algo muy simple de hacer. Pasamos a la siguiente, por favor. Entonces, como pueden ver, puede haber diferentes enfoques a través de los cuales podemos enfrentar este trilema, y estos enfoques son diferentes y se agrupan en dos criterios. En primer lugar, tenemos una ambición integrativa que nos habla de si intentan integrar las áreas o los objetivos económicos, sociales y medioambientales e intentan a la vez aumentar la sinergia y minimizar los impactos entre o intersectoriales. Y el segundo punto tendría que ver con la importancia relativa dada a los tres objetivos, y podemos distinguir diferentes enfoques que dan la misma prioridad a los tres objetivos, desde aquellos que básicamente que dicen que hay una jerarquía entre los tres. Por lo tanto, tenemos enfoques que son muy basados en el mercado y que se basan en la idea de que el crecimiento es algo que se debe perseguir sin importar el impacto social y medioambiental, y por este motivo este enfoque tiene una especie de optimismo irracional en su base. Por otro lado, Cuando hablamos acerca de este trilema, tenemos el enfoque de el crecimiento que debe quedar en segundo lugar, intentando lograr un bienestar que sea sustentable a nivel medioambiental, a nivel planetario. Y entre ambos extremos tenemos entonces un enfoque algo más equilibrado que intenta entregar una importancia igual a los aspectos económicos, sociales y medioambientales e integrarlos básicamente. Por lo tanto, ejemplos de este tipo de enfoque más equilibrado podrían ser el crecimiento verde, que se concentra en la relación entre el desarrollo y la sustentabilidad, intentando hacer que el crecimiento económico suceda de manera más verde, con una protección medioambiental a través de medios tecnológicos y a través de las revoluciones tecnológicas, y una transición justa que añade la dimensión social. Por lo tanto, pasando al siguiente punto, vemos cuál es el marco estratégico principal de la Unión Europea a la hora de enfrentar este tipo de trilemas. Ahora, haciendo una referencia al marco estratégico, por supuesto, tenemos el Pacto Verde Europeo del 2019, que es la estrategia actual de la Unión Europea, que fue presentada por la Comisión actual y, tal como estrategias previas, sigue siendo basada en la idea del crecimiento económico, pero la novedad principal del Pacto Verde Europeo en comparación con otras iniciativas previas es que entrega una prioridad clave a la lucha contra la degradación medioambiental en un intento porque el crecimiento sea verde, básicamente que la transición hacia un modelo económico carbono neutral pueda suceder con los objetivos hasta el 2050. Y en segundo lugar, en la siguiente diapositiva vemos otra estrategia clave para la Unión Europea, que es el Pilar Europeo de Derechos Sociales, que por su parte es básicamente la regla de derechos sociales de Europa y que contiene 20 principios y derechos que tienen que ver con las áreas sociales, que incluyen igualdad de oportunidades, igualdad de acceso al trabajo, condiciones dignas de trabajo y protección e inclusión social. Por lo tanto, estos derechos básicamente constituyen el estándar que la Unión Europea debe cumplir en todas las leyes diferentes que hablan acerca de la protección social y de las políticas del mercado del trabajo. Pasamos a la siguiente, por favor.
¿Por qué estamos viendo el Pacto Verde Europeo ante todo y el pilar social? Pues juntos son el marco socioecológico principal que estamos mostrando, y estas dos están enfocados a la dimensión socioecológica, y en Europa, ya lo hemos dicho, esto puede significar promover un crecimiento más compatible con las condiciones sociales y ecológicas. Y además, la transición justa es importante. Hay que abordar los desafíos sociales en nuestros países. Quizá una mentalidad un tanto estrecha, porque se enfrenta a enfrentar desafíos en ciertas áreas y vectores que van a ser muy vulnerables en esta transición. Y se enfoca también en el debate social. Hay que fijarse en las políticas de, del trabajo y las medidas para una mayor igualdad. Pero hay una relación entre el Pacto Verde Europeo y el pilar social, porque constituye un punto de referencia respecto al Pacto Verde, y se trata de dar una noción más amplia de qué es lo que está buscando hacer para compensar la mirada más estrecha que fue dada en un principio. Acá quiero mostrarles que el público puede ver herramientas para las políticas que son específicas para el mundo energético. Hay instrumentos financieros y recomendaciones para abordar esta transición, como por ejemplo el riesgo de una mayor pobreza energética o también el aspecto del consumo de carbono, la huella del carbono en otras áreas. Esto se refleja en los gobiernos macro socioecológicos de la Unión y esto se refleja en el enfoque seguido por la Unión Europea. Yo quiero entregar ahora el micrófono a Sebastiano para que continúe con la presentación. Gracias, Mateo. Ciertamente era más eurocéntrico. ¿Cuáles eran las propuestas que fue manifestado en 2019 ya con los inicios de la pandemia? Ahora, después de la pandemia, una de las principales reacciones de la Unión Europea fue preparar un paquete más amplio para la intervención financiera en los estados de la nueva generación que aborda 172.5 millones de euros que se les entregará a los Estados miembros para respaldar su recuperación del COVID. Ciertamente hay un impacto en el mundo laboral. Ciertamente nuestra idea es fomentar la recuperación laboral. Era importante proyectar esto, particularmente con el pacto verde también tenía que verse reflejado en el marco de estas políticas públicas para recuperarse del COVID. Y como pueden ver, el Green Deal, el pacto verde, significaba lo que tenía que ser hecho por los Estados miembros también en los distintos pilares de la sociedad. Y tiene que ver también con la transición verde, la ecológica. Vemos aquí que esto también tiene objetivos sociales y ecológicos. Este marco tenía que ayudar a recuperarse. Y el pacto verde, si nos fijamos en Brasil, esto lo respalda enormemente y trata de juntar los objetivos verdes y sociales tal como se ha visto en Europa. Tenemos estas dimensiones sociales, ecológicas y económicas. El análisis indica que hay que tomar decisiones justas que ya han sido introducidas antes. Y es una noción que surge quizás más vaga que en los debates políticos, pero hay que entender a cabalidad cómo se ve y cuáles son las funciones de los Estados miembros en estas posiciones. Esta transición es importante para desarrollar las directrices en estas áreas. Las preguntas aquí, el marco para recuperarse de la pandemia de COVID y para respaldar la transición justa, ¿cuál es el rol de los estados del bienestar? Aquí hay que fijarse en las áreas teóricas, lo dividimos en 4. Tenemos un punto de referencia que los estados del bienestar se tienen que fijar en las distintas áreas para diseñar e implementar las políticas de la transición verde. Hay que desarrollar las habilidades para los facilitadores en esta transición, pero también tienen estos estados que funcionar como amortiguadores y proteger en lo social, verse reflejado en políticas de protección social. Y además estos estados del bienestar deben ser como constructores del consenso o instrumento para la transición de conflictos y generar diálogo social. Y cuando nos fijamos en las áreas de recuperación y resiliencia, los mecanismos para ello, una importante función desarrollada como principio general es que los Estados miembros deben implementar sus reformas, particularmente para transformarse en un estado más verde, tienen que fijarse en las áreas establecidas en los pilares de derechos sociales, pero más concretamente funcionarán como una reformas más verdes de los sistemas fiscales, es decir, más ecológicas, y así trasladando los impuestos desde las áreas de trabajo que consumen más energía hacia el área del ambiente. Y hay que fijarse en los posibles efectos distributivos. Y respecto a las áreas de resiliencia, cuando van a renovar o remodelar edificios, deben fomentar la eficiencia energética. Hay que considerar incluso a los más vulnerables para que haya mayor igualdad y disminuir la pobreza energética. Debe ser más asequibles estas viviendas sociales. Ahora, en los Estados miembros de Europa vemos ejemplos cómo se ha realizado esto hemos visto el caso de Bélgica con una ola de renovación que promueve la eficiencia energética, particularmente en la exclusión de viviendas para los más vulnerables. Eso había que cambiar. En los planes de recuperación y resiliencia vemos que tiene una función capacitadora. Como ya ha sido mencionado por otros oradores, el Estado debe ser capaz de acompañar esta transición verde, asegurando que los ciudadanos tengan acceso a la fuerza laboral, teniendo las habilidades necesarias. Y también en Francia vimos que se enfocaron en el financiamiento de actividades de capacitación para aquellas profesiones que serían estratégicas a futuro, para un mañana. La función de los Estados miembros como amortiguador en esta transición no ha sido tan obvia en este mecanismo de recuperación y resiliencia. No se ha visto reflejado en los beneficios del trabajo, pero no está tan relacionado con la transición verde. Y lo mismo, el desarrollo de consenso y manejo de los conflictos está reflejada débilmente en ciertas áreas, pero sin embargo hay casos en estos Estados miembros en que el rol del diálogo social y la transparencia que llevará a un diálogo de la equidad, de la igualdad, sí puedo mencionar los marcos de España con su transición justa, que lograron un acuerdo de transición justa. Es una forma curiosa de cómo relacionan la estrategia social y cómo brindan apoyo a áreas del país a través de un proceso participativo. Aquí, a modo de conclusión, podemos decir que en este mecanismo de recuperación y resiliencia en la Unión Europea, para respuestas de la crisis observada, se necesita un enfoque balalianzo que conjugue las áreas social, ecológicas y económicas, además de un cierto grado de conciencia sobre el fuerte nexo socioecológico que ya existe y debe estar en línea con el Pacto Verde. De esa manera podemos preguntar y debatir entre nosotros si este enfoque implementado por Europa es efectivo. Como Mateo decía, este Green Deal, este pacto verde y las estrategias de crecimiento, es posible lograr un desarrollo sostenible mientras se enfoque en un objetivo de crecimiento económico. Esto es una pregunta abierta. ¿Y cómo se interpreta la transición justa? Esto debe ser equilibrado en los estados de bienestar y hay que fijarse la inversión social, con también un diálogo social y protección social. Además, esta semana estamos estudiando al respecto, estamos en Europa observando el cambio climático, la degradación, lo que se hace en Europa para obtener esta transición verde y cómo respaldar los aspectos sociales y económicos y hasta qué grado seremos capaces de juntos promover esta transición justa y ecológica a nivel político. Y miro con ansias el debate que se generará y les agradezco su atención. Thank you, Sebastiano and Mateo, for your presentations. In truth, there are several questions. I won't raise them right now, but there are many questions regarding what Fabio will be talking about next. And these are the consequences of some studies, particularly centered in Europe. And the question is, what happened in Latin America? So, Fabio, I now give you your 15 minutes of fame. It could be those centered on Latin America. Thank you, Eduardo. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation from Eurosocial, from Europe, and the University Alberto Hurtado. I made my degrees here more than 30 years ago when Chile was returning to the democratic life. And I was fortunate to be in Chile then and now. We are facing changes to face the transitions in terms of social, political, and institutional levels. I will talk about Latin America. We have some starting points for these transitions. I will focus on that following a severe crisis such as the one we have experienced through the pandemic, it is possible, we have now possibilities for reconstruction and for being better at it. I work in the ILO, in the UN. We're working in the 2020 agenda, where we have a pillar based on the social, economical, and environmental areas as our main goals. And this crisis has set us a significant challenge to achieve our goals in 8 years. The starting point for our region has always been difficult, given the asymmetry. If we can move forward here. Here we see the 4 words, concepts, or characteristics that Latin America has that distinguish it from other regions of the world. We have this possibility of having this exchange with Europe, where there is a good, they have traveled a while and make these transitions to achieve their goals in terms of the social, economic, and environmental areas. We have the asymmetries, we see some heterogeneous inequalities, and some transitions that we share, as well as aspirations or dreams we have to achieve those goals.
I will go back to the message of Alicia Bárcena in her lecture when she left ICLAC a few days ago, the economic gaps of huge concentration of wealth all over the world, health gaps as a region. We were hit the worst in in the healthcare sense. The amount of people who passed away was huge in terms of the population we have. We have climate gaps as well. The region accounts for 8% of the emissions, and also our ability to respond to the crisis was limited in comparison to developed countries. In other countries, there were better responses. Our response was limited. We had a huge hit on the drop of the GDP. In terms of labor, the amount of hours that were lost, the job positions that were lost were the greatest in the world. Last year, we had a recovery in many of the countries. However, this year, the outlook is that we are going to have a very modest recovery. If I remember correctly, the Monetary Fund has announced that the economic landscape in terms of the recovery a huge challenge, and this goes back to the possibility of recovering the world of labor as well as other social dimensions. Regarding how heterogeneous Latin America is, we started from a situation in the region and in each of the countries which was already heterogeneous. We have a high average of access to vaccines, but with huge differences among countries, among regions in the countries. And as I said it earlier, we had a decrease in the index of employment that was greatest in comparison to other regions, and the recovery has been delayed. Some countries are experiencing a very important recovery, but as I will mention it soon, a very unequal recovery. ECLAC also showed that in poverty and extreme poverty, we had a huge drop. We went back almost 27 years in terms of extreme poverty. So the expectations are very high in terms of our ambitions for recovery. Following up with how heterogeneous our region is in terms of economic and social and environmental inequalities, we also have a certain biodiversity heritage, but for some years now we have had a huge acceleration in the loss and degradation of biodiversity, as it was mentioned earlier, by the action itself of people, men who live in this continent, men and women who live here and perform certain economic activities aiming at production and consumption. So there is a lag in terms of climate mitigation cases, and there is a case here in Chile, which are the droughts and how we have responded. Now back to the issues of employment, because they relate a lot to the ongoing discussion and to the previous presentation of our colleagues from the Social Observatory and also the introductions that we have heard. Most of the transitions and the challenges that the region is facing have to do with the labor transition. Most of the inequalities are arising in the world of labor, and our inability with public policies, with our institutions, due to lack of development and lack of investment, and also due to a lack of development in the institutions that promote dialogue, social dialogue, lead us to have this at the core of the other social aspects. We had a huge drop in terms of employment. We need to get back to the previous levels of employment, even though some indicators are showing positive signs, for instance, a decrease in the rate of employment. But this is a variable that hides very diverse realities where we still have a need for recover the labor participation, especially of women, younger people, with major territorial differences. Most of the recovery at the regional level has happened through informal employment, so we have a huge challenge in terms of moving along towards the strategies to formalize labor. 1 out of 2 people in the labor market are within informal employment, and we need to have public policies to face that transition, and it imposes a huge barrier of access of our policies in a situation where labor or many of the activities take place in informal situations. Our institutions of professional training, social security, as well as other entities need to have or need to reach out to the different companies and the workers who are in the formal system, and that was mentioned also in the introduction. So unstructured economy historically has been studied in terms of the labor situation. So the pictures show that recovery by 2020 and by the end of 2020 in most of the countries have been led by informal employment. Now back to the transitions. It was mentioned earlier, which is a concept that the ILO has been working on together with different social stakeholders, and it is part of the three-part agreement, and it is associated to the dilemma and to the challenges that many countries are going over. However, we also have to add to that dimension, and that is why I feel it's very important that we have the contribution of Eurosocial when it brings this concept of the eco-social transition that involves the different dimensions of the transitions, also the concept of innovation, social innovation, economic innovation, innovation overall from the collective perspective, as well as the concept that we had heard of already, which is this idea of social cohesion. It is important that our demographic transition happens in the region. We will see an acceleration of the aging of the population much faster than in Europe. We will have a digital transformation with a huge impact over how the production takes place in the region. In terms of organization of production in labor, we all know how certain processes were accelerated with the pandemic, and finally the environmental transition. If we are able to put this in a context of social justice, we may talk about a just transition, and this idea of social justice starts with the instances for dialogue and social participation. And as we go along the journey of the transition, because ultimately there is a starting point which is very difficult with huge dilemmas, but also we have very clear goals in terms of where we want to go, and the dilemma would be how to go over that journey to achieve our goals. And it is not a trivial question. The possibility of having a different approach for the just transition may guarantee that the process is legitimate, it is widely socially accepted, it is participative, and I believe that that is part of the challenge that we have. Allow me to highlight part of the proposal of ECLAC, but also in dialogue with the other agencies that work in Latin America and the Caribbean regarding the need of having three different agreements: the productive, social, and fiscal agreement or compact. Our colleagues from the Social Observatory talked about the Green Deal in relation to the social pillar, but these are things that cannot be addressed in isolation. The productive agreement or deal has to do with sustainable production, formalization of smaller businesses, also innovation and the development of new skills, and the huge challenge that we have to generate a system of education and training for labor that allows us to integrate as many people as possible. And finally, the major challenges that we have in terms of regional integration and also regional value chains apart from our trade agreements internationally. The social deal was also mentioned in the introduction and in the presentations of the European Social Observatory. The formalization of employment protection towards or in the face of unemployment, the huge challenge we had in the pandemic crisis, also transfers, direct transfers to overcome the economic crisis. So how this effort will help us move towards a protection system that gives continuity to the expectations of economic security that many families have, especially those that were hit the most by the crisis. And finally, the expectation of having universal social protection and the development of a pillar of a care system or a care economy, which is one of the objectives that the Undersecretary mentioned in her remarks. And finally, the fiscal deal, because the other two deals will not be put in place without a fiscal deal that will allow us to move forwards in a progressive tax system to also avoid the taxes that are left unpaid, where in Latin America we have been fiscally limited in order to react in a counter-cyclic way to the crisis. So the situation of all the three social deals, I believe, are closely related to the major challenge of having an eco-social transition. And I would like to wrap up highlighting the aspects of the world of labor. The Undersecretary of Labor talked about many of these ideas as well. We need to go back to our agenda to promote and create more and better job positions related to productive policies, including just transitions in areas that have to do not only with energy, but also other sectors. We have seen major transformations, for instance, in trade, in tourism, and also there is a need for having a just a transition approach for the different sectors, where we need to put in place policies that will get to the companies that require that and to the workers that require that require to improve and adapt their skills to continue to be part of the world of labor. And it needs to go hand in hand with the development of social protection policies, always thinking about the sustainable policies for an income whenever transitions happen. This was widely highlighted in the declaration of ILO for the future of labor, the need to invest in people through social protection training for labor, and also invest in the institutions of labor that will allow us to facilitate the transitions in the world of labor, employment services, public employment services as well, that are not readily available for everyone throughout the territory, and finally to accompany the sustainability of companies, especially the area of smaller and medium-sized businesses. And finally, the pillar that ILO works on, which are the international labor standards in terms of rights of workers and the promotion of social dialogue, ultimately to reinvest in the institutions so that there is a guarantee of fulfillment of the rights of the workers, and also the necessary instances for social dialogue to achieve this goal of decent work for everyone. So I finish my presentation with this, and I am available to take any questions. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Fabio. It is a difficult task that we have ahead of ourselves, and you have the difficult task of closing the panel, and we will hear your comments regarding both of the presentations, and then we will take questions. Thank you, Eduardo, and also thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me today in this very interesting panel. Thank you so much to our colleagues that have presented already. And it's a difficult task to make comments regarding presentations that have already analyzed the situation in depth. So, without repeating what has been mentioned already regarding the situation in Latin America, Fabio mentioned a few ideas, and I just want to highlight a few aspects. I think it is very important to always remember that in Latin America we have ecosystems that are relevant at the world level. For instance, the Amazon, and plenty of biodiversity that we need to maintain or re-establish. And at the same time, the countries of the region have a huge potential for renewable energies, green hydrogen, which is more and more important here in Chile. But also we have wind energy, solar energy, and in some countries we also have geothermal energy. And also, this is the region where we have many indigenous groups among the most vulnerable communities. At the same time, I would like to highlight that the productive matrix in most of the countries is not diversified, or in general in the world, Latin America continues to be an exploiter and exporter of raw materials, and it continues to offer a low-cost labor, which are factors that may be part of the debate when it comes to an eco-social transformation. So even if in the world and here in the region, even if we start with with an energy transformation that comes from fossil fuels, it would be impossible for us to consider that this will be a new post extractivism era. And in that sense, we have to take into account that for the entire change of the energy matrix over the world, it would take so many minerals that most of them in the future, they will continue to be produced here in the region. So, for instance, for an electrical vehicle, we would need twice as many metals in comparison to a regular combustion engine, and the consumption of lithium is now starting to, or it is getting more and more demanded, and it will increase in 40 times in the following years. So actually, in the process of electrification of the energy production, also very important for Chile, the use or the demand for copper will triple in the following years or in the following decades with the energy transformation.
Well, then, considering what has been said so far, if we want to see an eco-social transformation that places an equal and sustainable well-being in the core of policies to transform the structures of inequality and the destruction of ecosystems caused by the limited accumulation, then we need to consider that all of these processes of this new extraction, they have to be considered in social policies. Or does this mean that many policies have been mentioned by the other speakers, particularly by Fabio? But I believe that given these parallel processes, they are on course. We need not only social policies but also a focus on the social, economical, and environmental aspects. We need to focus on other areas such as agriculture. We are facing a dilemma between food safety because we know that due to the war in Ukraine, we shall face a food crisis. And this is in a debate with the agroecology because there's a trend that will change the use of more areas that are still wild and will be used for farming in order to feed people. And so I believe it is a generalized problem of this eco-social transformation. So how do we establish priorities? This has been seen in other presentations. How do we face this trilemma of the three areas, the economic, social, and environmental areas? This is the biggest issue that we are facing. So dilemmas and trilemmas, as we say, but we could say it's important to have an alliance of all all the stakeholders at national and international level. So in the different countries, all the stakeholders, the government, the public and private sectors, the unions, the academics, they need to work together to jointly find ways and to implement new policies. And also, I believe it's very important as an additional measure to increase the possibility of citizen involvement so that within the formulating process of new policies they also reflect the interests of the different groups. So this is one of the lemmas of this eco-social transformation, to leave no one behind. In closing, I was very pleased when I was invited to this seminar by Eurosocial Plus, because I believe it is a very important step to have this dialogue between Europe and Latin America, because the large problems of today cannot be solved at micro section, at country level or even European level. We need more dialogue, more cooperation between all, so that we can face these very serious problems that we see today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Astrid. Really, in your presentation, I focused on one significant point. We see a transformation that arises from the energy needs and of growth and the food aspects, not only because of the war, because war really has accelerated matters. And you posed one aspect that Fabio mentioned. In what way can Latin America make this transition from this extraction model when we see a demand for more raw materials, of extracting them and sending them straight away? Lithium, for instance, it will be difficult for us to have the capacity to innovate and make the matters in lithium that needs to be more efficient and smaller, but the product, or rather the raw material, is extracted here in other countries and sent to Australia. So once again, it sets us the problem of how Latin America can move or make this shift. So I leave this as an open question to our speakers in Europe. I don't know if Sebastiano or Matteo could make any comments in respect of what Astrid and Fabio said. Muchas gracias por sus intervenciones y por la retroalimentación. Sobre el último punto que mencionó y lo dicho por Astrid también, no tengo una respuesta cierta, pero sí puedo decir que estoy de acuerdo con ustedes, porque es el de los puntos importantes de facto, que el cambio climático, el deterioro ambiental y también la biodiversidad son desafíos globales y no pueden ser abordados por un solo país o región, sea la Unión Europea o Latinoamérica. Por estos motivos, cuando se habla de la transición verde y cuando se habla específicamente sobre una transición justa, es un acuerdo grande, un esfuerzo muy grande, pero ya se ve un aumento en las tensiones geopolíticas, pero se necesita una mayor cooperación y hay que ver la dinámica multidimensional de estos procesos y cómo las decisiones tomadas a un nivel influyen sobre otras y cómo los países latinoamericanos logran estos procesos de transformación y va a afectar las posibilidades de Europa en su transición verde. Igualmente, las decisiones tomadas en Europa impactarán en otras partes del mundo. Queda claro que debemos intercambiar nuestras prácticas y fortalecer la coordinación institucional, también la cooperación hay que aumentarla. Thank you, Sebastiano. Fabio, do you have something to add? Quite briefly, it is a great dilemma at public policy and political level, but it is also an opportunity, this possibility of lithium export and other natural resources and minerals. But in fact, this dilemma has to do with how can we harness the income from those greater imports without discouraging the possibility of continuing investments. And then there's a debate in the use of the income created through this exploitation. And we know there's a very significant ecological risk due to this exploitation. So we need to develop the institutionality to ensure or reduce environmental impact. Also, it is not possible to give up that possibility of exploiting natural resources. So there's also a dilemma of just transition and who are the stakeholders, not only the workers, but the companies and unions, the communities that are affected, the indigenous peoples, then also the changes in Latin America that is shifting towards a decentralization of their government and institutions. So the local people have a greater voice regarding what happens in their immediate surroundings, not only in Chile, but also in Peru, Bolivia, Argentina. We see they have the structure necessary for the local governments to face this. So we are also facing a challenge at institutional level, how to face these more local and regional problems. Astrid, regarding this last point, at times we leave aside the environmental aspect. What happens? Let's see, when people are affected, they complain, they raise their voice, they say, I have a problem with a given production model or activities, the area that is affected, the people are not longer tranquil. But who defends planet Earth? Does Earth defend itself? Like a person facing a flu, Earth is now complaining several years after we saw a problem. Nowadays, we're experiencing a drought that is quite important. It's not just a small area of the sacrifice areas that is not so obvious in Chile because, for instance, the extraction area of lithium is in the desert. But when things start to happen in larger cities, then people start to speak up. Do you see a way or a possibility of finding this path in Latin America in order to move forward in a just transition, not only in the environmental area, but also the digital aspects or access to broadband, to better connectivity. There's so many issues that arise regarding this transition. What is your view in this respect? I believe that in general, solutions need to be identified in the different countries because there's no recipe that is valid for all. Otherwise, they would win a Nobel Prize. Each country needs to identify their own strategies. And beware, not only in Latin America, but in the rest of the world. For instance, if we consider circular economies where there's recycling of all minerals, this would reduce the need or could help reduce extraction of new minerals. I don't know in what measure, but that has to do. One has to reflect on one's own consumption. Say, do I need a new or the latest model of of a cell phone, or can I use mine a bit longer? Can I give mine to the next person? And we take it to a macro level. There are other objectives. For instance, some of you may have heard of agreement for negotiating of Latin American countries to improve access to information, of involvement and access to environmental justice. So far, 13 countries have signed or have ratified this agreement, and today started the first meeting between the member countries here in Chile. So this is an initiative for the long term that needs to be supported in order to face these different problems. We have 5 minutes remaining or less, so we can take questions from the floor. I have here, do we see a question for Matteo and Sebastiano? You have a objective of energy poverty in Latin America. Will this be critical? What has been done in this respect in Europe regarding energy poverty?
Muy bien, responderé. Gracias por la pregunta. Es muy relevante, por supuesto, y es una de las dos áreas donde la Unión Europea está actuando más cuando hablamos de la transición socioecológica. Cuando hablamos de cuál o qué está haciendo la Unión Europea, debemos tener en cuenta que las políticas sociales en un estado de bienestar siguen siendo lo que queda de las políticas nacionales y su proceso. Por lo tanto, en teoría, la Unión Europea no tiene una competencia vinculante cuando hablamos de políticas sociales tradicionales, pero a pesar de esto, desde el año 2009, la Unión Europea, a través de su política de energía, ha comenzado a echar luz sobre la vulnerabilidad energética y el riesgo de pobreza energética, y ahora mismo se están emitiendo recomendaciones para los Estados miembros para implementar políticas para combatir la pobreza energética, y tenemos recomendaciones que se relacionan con la ola de renovación, donde la Unión Europea básicamente ayuda a los Estados miembros a básicamente actualizar su la eficiencia energética de las viviendas. En segundo lugar, existe una herramienta financiera que se ha propuesto recientemente por parte de la Comisión Europea, que no ha sido aprobada aún, así que no sabemos dónde estará en la legislación, si es que estará, pero es un fondo social del clima, que básicamente es un fondo donde los Estados miembros pueden enfrentar este tipo de vulnerabilidades de energía para las familias de bajos ingresos, y son actualmente los dos marcos políticos para enfrentar la pobreza energética. Thank you so much. We are going to be taking one question for each panel member. I have two questions for Fabio. One is more general, and the other one is more specific, which is a very interesting one. So we will take this one. The question goes, how do we save those traditional occupations that are part of the identity of those places where huge economic activities are taking place? For instance, craftsman fishing or artisanal fishing. How do we do this? It has a huge impact, right? I think one of the points that we mentioned earlier was the issue of innovation, or the topic of innovation. I think we have to invest in innovation regarding how traditional means of production may become sustainable through a reorganization, maybe, and also to reboost the social demand for those services or products. The organization through cooperatives and through organizing the workers can provide further sustainability and also generate a space in the market that would allow local activities to be connected with other activities that happen in the territory, for instance, tourism. So it seems to me that there is an element of innovation, maybe technology of economic promotion, and also certain processes and things that have to improve, and also the workers have to be re-skilled for them to introduce new technologies, always respecting the space for traditional production that they may have. I believe that there are many cultural instances that have been recovered, and many different traditional practices have been recovered, especially activities that are traditionally activities that are carried out by women, and they are integrated in other activities, as I mentioned earlier, tourism. So I think innovation will help us sustain these activities in time, and also will help families remain in that territory to avoid that they come to the urban areas where the services are limited, where housing is more expensive, where that also has a huge social cost for them, instead of reinvesting in the territory in those traditional economic activities. Great. Astrid, it's a similar question for you, but with a slightly different approach, because the question from one person from the audience is, have you planned on having any reparation policies in those territories that historically have suffered the impact of this, understanding that in those territories there is a diversity of views of the world, because those peoples have been living in those territories for so long? Are reparations a way of moving forwards in terms of public policies? Well, it's a difficult question. I think it always depends on the situation specifically, of course. Of course, yes, it could be a good idea, but I think it always needs to be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. And the question is, can we recover everything that has been destroyed? Because many times there are damages to the ecosystem that are impossible to recover from. So usually I always think that we have to analyze the situation on a case-by-case basis beforehand to avoid damage, and also to look for other solutions that are more sustainable and that are more environmentally friendly for the people who live in the region or in the territory, and also more friendly with the environment. Perfect. I'm sorry, we are running out of time, so Astrid, Fabio, Sebastiano, and Mateo, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for your attention as well. Thank you so much, Eduardo, and all the panel members. We invite you to step out. And now we would like to give the floor to Beatriz Garcia from the area of democratic governance from Eurosocial in FIAP. with a master's degree in gender and development by the Complutense Institute of International Studies, with over 20 years of experience in this area, emphasizing the projects of sustainable development. Beatriz, the floor is yours. She will be the moderator of the following panel. Thank you so much. We are waiting for our two panel members, Cecilia and Natalia. Please come forward. All four of us are here, ready to go. And Natalia, where are you? There we go. Okay then, let's get going. Well, it is very interesting. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the invitation to be the moderator of this panel, because here we will address the practical issues. We are talking about social dialogue, we're talking about a transition, we are talking about employment, we are talking about social reforms, and we have here people who are representing the public sector. Cecilia, thank you so much. We have the private sector with Claudio, and also the workers. Thank you, Natalia. Without further ado, I will be introducing each one of the panel members, and for this I do need a little bit of help, but I want to invite you to take a look at the title of this panel, because the title is very, very broad and very challenging as well. You have it here on the screen. It is Social and Employment Measures Adopted Through Social Dialogue, not through an imposition, not through other instances, through social dialogue, where in territories there is an approach that wants to be specific. It wants to serve specific needs of the people who live in each territory, because there are differences across Chile, across the region in Latin America. There are differences among the countries, and it is a similar case in the European Union. So I will ask all three panel members to focus your responses on the territories that have been affected by reconversion processes. Without further ado, Cecilia. Cecilia, welcome. Cecilia, she's a sociologist. She studied in the Catholic University of Chile with a master's degree in management and public policies from the University of Chile. Currently, she is the head of the area of participation and dialogue from the Ministry of Energy, but she has been working in the ministry from 2014. So she's been there for some time. She has worked in the private sector, but that is the main activity that she has done recently. We also have Claudio Sibach, who studied in the Catholic University with a master's degree in engineering by the Stanford University. Currently, executive chair of the Association of Generators of Chile. I was looking at this online, Claudio. This trade association, what is this about? I find this to be very interesting. It's the trade association that represents the energy generation companies that act in Chile, that is comprised by a broad group of companies that develop, build, and operate energy projects in the country. Natalia? Natalia is here representing the approach, which is maybe more regional, not so much at the national level, but at the end of the day, they are complementary to one another. She represents workers. She has a degree in public sciences by the University of La República in Uruguay. She is joining us today in her role of advisor to the Federation of Workers of the Americas, representing approximately 55 million workers in the region of over 40 unions at the national level in 21 countries in Latin America. So thank you so much for joining us. We will start with Cecilia, and I want to invite you. We are running a little bit behind, so because of the previous panel, that's right, yes. We are not late yet, but we are running a little bit behind. So, Cecilia, please, you have 4 minutes to briefly introduce the keys of the strategy of the just transition in Chile. What can you tell us about this, Cecilia? It's quite the topic. Thank you so much for the invitation. I work in the area of participation of or involvement in the Ministry of Energy, so I will always speak from that perspective, dialogue, participation, and how we have been promoting this in the ministry. I want to tell you that in the Ministry of Energy, we started drafting in 2020 a just transition strategy with participation, but in 2020 there was a pandemic, the participation was online, we were all learning how to do this, so one could say that it is maybe not the best quality of participation that we would have liked to have in order to draft a strategy of the complexity that we had, but we did what we could at that moment. We invited the communities in the areas where there are coal powered plants, and we invited unions related to the different activities. We invited the community, the academia, the public, and the private sector as well. And we drafted a strategy that was published at the end of last year. And the strategy has three key areas. One is environmental, to address all the environmental issues that happen in those areas. There is a social and also labor aspect that addresses the situation of the communities and the workers. And there is the economic development aspect. How do we re-transform the territories in a more innovative manner? How do we change the productive activity? How do we go over this conversion? In this social and labor aspect, which gathers us today, I want to tell you the complexity that we see. This is a highly complex system of chains of workers, because we have the direct workers that work in the power plants that are left without a job, but also there is a number of workers that are outsourced, and there are other services, for instance, ports. All the workers that have been working on coal throughout their lives, and they do not know how to do anything else. And we also have other activities that have nothing to do with the power plant itself. But for instance, that person who is selling coffee and sandwiches to the workers that come to work. So there is a complexity and a network of workers that are participating in this in some way or the other. So from my role in the ministry, we got together with the workers that came to the ministry to ask us to do something for them. I got to hear their demands, their concerns, and I want to include those and to put them on the table, because I feel that when you listen to the workers, one thinks there's so much to do and it's not an easy task, and that is something that I want to convey here. First of all, there are different types of workers, as I said it myself. Some of them are highly skilled, and it is not so easy to sort of transform them into green employments. And it's not so easy. It sounds beautiful. It sounds like a good idea. And they say, yes, we want to be retrained. But when we think about this, we think about their skills, their knowledge. Maybe that is not as easy as it may sound. To turn energy into renewable, yes, maybe that could be the case, but into other activities, that sounds a little bit more difficult. And other concerns that they have to do not only with their employment and income, which is the first thing that comes to mind. I would say that there are three more things. Healthcare, because they say that even though today there is a strict standard, and now coal thermal plants have a higher standard, beforehand when they started their operations the standard was not as high, and some of them are saying that they have suffered for many years from the pollution from asbestos as well as other toxic agents. Not anymore, for many years, right? But I have a history of this, and I don't know what is going to happen. I do not have healthcare tests. I'm afraid that I will be left without a job, that I will get sick, that I will not be able to afford a treatment. So there are a set of issues that are associated to labor and losing your source of income. Secondly, there are people that have been working for many years and they want to retire, that they have gone to a point that they don't want to be retrained. And thirdly, people say that they want to be acknowledged for the work that they have conducted, for their contribution to the development of the country for many decades, where Chile was connected to the world, to energy, thanks to coal-powered plants. And now they feel that they are being discarded because that activity is no longer acceptable, and there needs to be a symbolic acknowledgement that needs to happen for their contribution to the country, paying sometimes with their own health, with their own bodies, and that's not easy, because by acknowledging that, everyone, we are subject to a litigation or a lawsuit, and that is highly, highly complex. And one last comment. I think I'm over 4 minutes now. Yes, I think I am. But lastly, the complexity of what is the framework to use, because somehow we have the bare legal minimum that each company needs to fulfill, which is not much, because the healthcare systems that we have in place, because the welfare system, the pension system, requires you to fulfill the bare minimum, but that is not enough. And if we move towards the other extreme, let's face this in the framework of human rights and eco-social transition, in that case, we don't have a framework for that. We don't have a legal institutionality. We don't have the instruments. So it is difficult to address the situation in the right manner. So that is my initial comment.
Vamos a darle la palabra a Claudio.
We will now hear from Claudio. If you could talk about the social measures and employment measures in these areas that are affected by reconversion, please talk about the role of the social dialogue. Just to start, and then we could hear more about this. If you could share your perspective in 4 brief minutes. I will try, but maybe Cecilia closed with the word challenge and of putting this in a context. When we talk about energy just or eco-social transition, we need to be aware that the transformation that we need to do in the coming 20, 30 years is at a scale that has never been seen before. We need a window of time to survive as humankind. Let's say we have 200 years with industrial revolution, coal, natural gas, and we're burning fuel at a rate that is so quick in comparison to how long Mother Earth took in creating these fossil fuels. And it is difficult to show this, to reflect this. In the case of Chile, electricity is about 25% of consumption. Diesel covers 30%. Almost nobody talks about diesel. 15% of fuels, liquid petroleum gas. So what happens when we're talking about the geopolitical aspect here, and we're concerned with Russia invading Ukraine with its gas pipeline. So you have to take that at a local level and see how is the impact. And this happens at such a rate that we have to ask ourselves how to be fair. When we go to a country like Chile that doesn't consume fossil fuels at such a significant rate, we did have some coal in Arauco, in Magallanes, but thankfully we are not offering fuels. We are in production, however, and it has been in the electricity sector. Petroleum reflects more than 40%. So electricity is located in specific areas of the country, concentrating the industries given the nearness to harbors. We also have some thermonuclear plants and other power plants that meet the conditions that have been set in recent times. But the labor and social transition, the commitments that we took as an emerging nation, those are significant. We have not seen this in South Africa, Turkey, or Poland, of shutting down the coal sector. That has been together, that goes hand in hand with the areas that we need to talk about. The companies, we have seen the case of Europe. We have many European companies in Chile. They're investing heavily. Some are in renewable fuels, others are in coal. But there are other countries involved that are seeking to work in this immediate change in reconverting the labor aspect. Almost 100% of all that we are developing is in renewable energy. That has to do with the use of territories, the development of this power generation, and the other policies that involve. There are many other aspects throughout the coastline of Chile that can be affected, but in the rest of the territory, we have a community that has a past, a future, in which the social policies, public policies will need to have an area at a greater scale than even the reconversion of coal that had not been seen before. In the coming decade, there will be other reconversions. We'll see the change in automotive. Vehicles have to disappear within 2 decades. What shall we do with the tens of thousands of people that depend on the automotive sector? So the area of the climate change, the transformation in energy generation, and others has to be localized, and we need to understand can we do this together in a fair way, because many times we have seen in history that companies, when they come to a new territory, they see vulnerabilities and they have acted in the absence of a government, because there it is lacking. So the company is to develop a shared value with the communities, but there's a limit. We need to see how to leverage public policies to assume the vulnerability in terms of power of those areas, and how to generate the policies that address all of these areas. And we need to localize ourselves in the larger, the more, as well as in the more specific areas that are particular to Latin America. Thank you. That has been most interesting. Natalia, I'll make the same question as I did to Claudia. From the point of view of the workers in the different territories, these social and employment measurements that are adopted in these processes of reconversion, they can be traumatic. What is the role of social dialogue? What is the view of workers? Thank you for the invitation on behalf of the workers' unions of Latin America. In starting to talk about the social dialogue, it's important to place this debate on the just transition on a model, and to consider that the challenges are structural as well as particular or specific, given the diversity and the local, regional, and national characteristics, as well as in the short, medium, and long term. and the development model in which this just transition is being debated, it is important to have because this development model is based on a specific model for production and consumption that places profit based on exploitation of people and natural resources. And here, that is how we come up with a development model, and we have an alternative proposal that modifies the objective towards which we are working, not on profit, but rather on the life and working conditions as the central point to this models, particularly leading to the change in production and consumption. This can be deceitful. We don't believe it is easy because we are coming from a history of exploitation. It is a great challenge to change this way of doing things. So the very challenge of social dialogue, because we need to have dialogue, we need to have all stakeholders sitting together, and we need to keep in mind and keep records that there are other peoples involved, and the state is also at the table. Public policies are essential here too. So the state has certain rights and obligations. In terms of the duties, they need to place the labor institutions and the mechanisms for there to be a social dialogue that is effective and effective in participation or involvement. Now, in the 70s in the US, we see the rise of this social dialogue due to the closing of a nuclear power plant. We see have the workers, unions, members of the communities, and also of environmental agency. It's not only fair because the level of justice of thinking about a transition, it's not only the workers or the communities, those that suffer from the transition. It's also fair or just because of the dialogue that is generated. So in our region, we see we are lacking. The CCA, Filia, and the COT, these workers' unions, the transitions of the just transition policies left aside certain unions, so they do not know what are the conditions in which these strategies will be developed and what is the cost, not only for the workers. They no longer have these funds, and those that will become in terms of social and economical challenges, as Claudio was saying. So social dialogue is a structural challenge to think about transition, not only in energy, but all the transitions that have been mentioned that have a component such as digital, because works are being substituted by technology, and the impact this may have, transitions in terms of social protection systems. As Cecilia was mentioned, in territories, people were also demanding social and health policies that are the basis of these pillars. We have health, fundamental working conditions, and others that are lacking in our countries. We lack strong, robust social protection, and the risk of developing by leaving aside the workers and the associated rights to education, health is very significant. And last, there are 2 or 3 risks or specific challenges. One has to do with democracy. We are facing a complex time in the region and in the world. Democracy in the participative mechanisms and how we sit down and open a social dialogue at national level, not only as to how we'll transition the sources of work and the communities and the indigenous people, and the challenge having to do the multilateral aspects of these global policies. Here we need to consider asymmetries between North and South, the place that Latin America and the Caribbean have in the insertion to a workplace and other regions. How do we finance the policies for transition without falling into the cycle that come up with the same excluding policies that have affected most the workers and communities and families in particular? I'm leaving this open also to lead it to a second question. Thank you. In truth, thanks to all three, you have opened and gone ahead to the subjects that will be talked about next. We now know where you each stand. So we were considering two questions about the difficulties and opportunities, of course. So we'll make those two questions together so that we can organize ourselves. So if we can make a division as you speak, 4 to 5 minutes max. You're asking for miracles. No, we're doing fine. Let's talk about those risks, those challenges, specific risks and challenges in a territory that needs to reconvert companies and industries that pollute, that affect life, labor, and the productive tissue. So risks and challenges, as well as opportunities and maybe lessons learned. I've liked that you have mentioned positive aspects, things that have been identified, not only the challenges. Let me start by saying that workers were included in elaborating this just transition program. It is true, the state has not moved forward in implementing it. It was somewhat easy to write it down, but implementing it is different. We see that it's not only about drafting them, but we need to apply these policies. And here we face deficits. The workers are not satisfied in this respect. What are the difficulties? Well, we have the risks. As to risks and challenges, well, the difficulty is not easy, not clear. What are the liabilities of companies and the state? Nobody wants to assume it, so they're passing the buck over back and forth. In the end, this entails a cost, and it will be paid by somebody. Another risk is that workers can have the right of it, but when you're pressuring, how far do workers have to assume certain cost? Zero cost? They might say, I want a different job in this place with the same level of income and the same kind of work. And the answer is, that's not possible. I cannot offer you the same. We need to modify the type of work, the income, or you have to move cities. So it's a significant challenge. It's difficult to tackle, but it is real. And the other aspect is that the state over several years has had a policy of focalization towards the most vulnerable. However, those those workers do not fall in the bracket of most vulnerable. They earn more than the specific amount. So they are also being left aside because the state has not been able to respond to this aspect of vulnerability.
Also, the issue of their health and their age. We do not have any instruments available to be able to respond to the demands that they have. One may want to address that from the state, but there isn't a system for protection of their health from the state in order to address those needs. Basically, those are the risks and challenges. And the other question, which is related to the public policy proposals that we see here. This is something that I have been alluding to earlier. I think we have to be able to work beyond the healthcare system that we have in place, beyond the welfare system, beyond the pension system, because with those systems, it's not enough. We're not meeting the needs of the workers today. But for that, we need to do what? Do we draft a law that will take 3 or 10 years? So what we have to do is to create a protection system, a healthcare system, a pension system, which is different from what we have now, which is innovative without going through the legal modifications that may take so long. That is a challenge, but that requires that we involve all the different stakeholders to go beyond what the law requires from them. So this is a work that needs to happen between different public entities, Ministry of Economy, of Health, of social development, and that is not easy to coordinate. Also, the state and private companies need to work together. Energy companies also have to work together. That is not easy either. And also companies from other economic sectors that should be part of the challenge, because companies are not only from the energy sector, but also from different economic sectors and different workers, because here each worker is looking after their own unions, their own workers. Each union is looking after their own members. They all have different demands, different needs, and we have to be able to work in coordination. Lastly, I want to say that maybe, with the exception of the industry of salmon in the south or the forestry industry in the south of Chile, even though we may have many things to say regarding the environmental impact, it's not easy to go over the transformation of a sector in terms of their economic activity. How are we even going to do that? I do not see a clear pathway forward in terms of the economic reconversion in order to absorb all that labor and to promote a different type of development in those areas. Those are challenges. I feel in a situation where I only see challenges around me in this area. What about the opportunities? Well, we have heard already, but let's say an outlook regarding lessons learned or good practices. Is there something that you would like to highlight, something that you have identified in the ministry, maybe good practices, good experiences? Definitely dialogue. It has been We have been willing to listen. We have been having conversations with the unions throughout the chain that has been affected. We have heard them. We have not been able to respond or to meet their demands, but they have been heard, definitely. And we are trying to come up with an idea how to do this, facing the climate challenge that Claudia talked about, which is so urgent. We need to try to close the coal plants, and we need to transform this into embracing the climate change, not only because we're no longer using coal, but because the world of other industries that we have to develop will allow us to adapt ourselves and mitigate climate change. I think there is an opportunity there, but it requires resources in order to put in place the new job positions. I mean, electromobility, refurbishing of housing, distributed generation, and so on and so forth. There are so many green businesses that we may engage in to adapt ourselves to climate change, but the resources that we have are not enough to retrain all the workers that need that. Okay, then, Claudio, same question for you. I was trying to think that many of the things that Cecilia said, I think that are also things that I wanted to share, but I would like to mention some ideas to mention challenges and opportunities. And I want to go back to the size of the challenge, but now in relation specifically to the withdrawal or shutdown of coal plants. In 2018, we had 5,300 megawatts of generation in 28 plants. So one of the virtues of coal is that it has a continuous ability to generate in time. It would give us energy during the nighttime. It would give us security. It is an energy source that throughout history has given that. And also the workers live that in their own experiences. The energy that coal has given them, especially during a drought as in 1990 or even today, where we are going over this water crisis which is so severe because of the effect of the climate crisis. There is something there. There's something in coal. And for the workers, they say coal has been key to keep our lights on. But we are aware of the fact that there is a commitment to shut the plants down, and there is a challenge. Just an example is that considering that we had over 5,000 watts of coal that are going to go down to zero, they have to be replaced with renewables, of course. And that is over 15,000 because of the conversion rate, because coal is continuous in time, solar energy is only during the daytime, and for instance, wind only produces at a smaller rate. So it is more or less a 1-to-3 ratio. So we need 15,000 watts. So that takes an investment at a scale that we have been sustaining in time, and Chile has been acknowledged as a country which is highly attractive for the investment because precisely, and maybe I disagree, because we have been able to attract foreign investment because thanks to our global participation, thanks to our trade agreements, thanks to our highly competitive market, we have a technology which is coal, but now we have a better one, which is wind and sun and solar energy. And of course, there are impacts, there are risks, there are challenges, eco-social challenges as well. But I want to say that that is the scale of the challenge, that is the size of it. And we have to be aware of the fact that the only way in which we are going to be able to withdraw coal is going to be triggering investments and also to continue to attract investments, maintaining the quality of the institutionality, maintaining dialogue and social cohesion in our country, so that the person who is going to invest or the businesses that are going to invest in those 15 renewable watts, and also the ability to transmit that, all the network that we're going to need. So the challenge is renewable energies in new areas that will have to be sent to different areas where that is needed. So in that sense, we see that there is a huge challenge. And in terms of opportunities, at least in terms of labor, the countries that used to have coal operations that are investing in renewables, along with other new companies in Chile that are making this bet, making the investments, that gives us the opportunity for retraining or work reconversion. And you said it yourself, many times it is limited because the skills are different, of course, but we are looking for relocation, retraining, and at least the companies have been doing that within their scope of action. But back to the context of the climate crisis. The opportunity we have is the only opportunity we have. First of all, we have to decarbonize the electric generation, but afterwards, and that is the greatest transformation that we have to go over, is to overcome oil and fossil fuels in all the countries. How are we going to eliminate diesel in all public transportation, logistics, trucks, mining operations? Those are other transformations, and there is another opportunity to invest, to innovate. We heard about lithium, we heard about copper. So the climate crisis forces us, and it puts Chile in a position of huge challenges, but also of opportunities. And we have the key that opens the door to tackle the climate crisis. And once again, we need social dialogue. We need to figure out how to do that in a way that we accompany those that are left behind, that are left more vulnerable, that will not be able to reconvert. But always the biggest challenge is climate crisis and also reconverting ourselves towards a new energy system which is low in emissions, sustainable, resilient to the impacts of climate change, because climate change is not only about mitigation, it's about facing the change itself. So there are risks and opportunities that will require a joint work, and it will require a level of resources that we had never seen before, and we will have to do it if we want to shot at tackling the climate crisis. Thank you. It's very interesting. Thank you for that. Natalia, the floor is yours. When we talk about recommendations and proposals of policies, we are always at risk of being too general in our proposal, looking at the region, and also we run the risk of being so specific that we leave behind other elements that are important for certain countries and not others. So more than opportunities, I would talk about different leads or clues, thinking about a truly just transition plan from the perspective of unions. Yes, we need to create more job positions for those that will be left without a job. Definitely, there will be people left without a job when the plants close, when they are shut down, when they move. When we move towards renewable energy, there will be workers left without a job. They won't be able to be relocated because they will need retraining, maybe because they are closer to retirement, maybe because they live elsewhere and they can't just pack and move. So we need to replace those job positions, because a person can't be left without a job due to a crisis that they were not responsible for. And there is a concept here that in the discussion regarding climate change always keeps coming up, which is the common responsibility but differentiated responsibility. We are all responsible for tackling climate change, especially the crisis, which is far more wide than just climate change, but we have differentiated responsibilities, and the situation of Latin America and the Caribbean is hugely imbalanced in comparison to the global north, and it is very important to consider that. And if we look at the countries, there is also a differentiated responsibility of those that live from their work in comparison to those that live from the investment and the reproduction of the system that caused emissions, climate crisis, environmental crisis, and so on and so forth. Back to the just transition plan. Training and education, that is key. It is key to be able to re-skill the person, to retrain the workers, and for that we need training and education for real. It needs to be put in place with public plans, with formal education, with informal education, with a state which plays a role, and also making access to that education universal. It needs to be free, public, universal, and needs to be done for different ages, not only for those workers that will be retrained to change positions, but also for their families. Also, a guarantee of maintaining the conditions of work, salaries, as well as other benefits, with the premise that the workers should not pay the price of the transition, guaranteeing that their rights are fulfilled. In Brazil, the members of the unions that are part of our organization keep presenting the same idea. The cleaner the energy, the worse the conditions of the workers that work there. So there is a problem going on. There is a problem if renewable energies, if the companies that work with outsourcing, without any type of acknowledgement of the basic rights of the workers that they have in other jobs that are directly with the companies, without a recognition of minimum wages, without recognition of the working hours, without collective bargaining and freedom to be members of unions, we have a problem. We have it today with fossil fuels, and we will have it tomorrow with renewables. We need to incorporate the gender perspective. That is key. And also we need to do an intersectional analysis, considering which are the most vulnerable population and what will the impacts of the transition be over the populations, including the different communities in the territories. We need to guarantee effective binding mechanisms of involvement with the communities, with unions, with different organizations. It isn't only the voice of the state and public policies, which is of course key. We are in a country where the public role has been reduced to the bare minimum, and I don't have to say it myself, I'm not even from here. Clearly, we see that this has brought along a major social rupture, a huge social conflict for living outside to a large part of the society. We need to highlight the local development, the subnational development. Cecilia talked about this herself. We have to work so that the rural and the urban development are not as imbalanced as they are. We need to consider the role of the territories, public transportation, public services. Another key element that we keep losing and leaving aside whenever we talk about new minerals, new extractions, new industries that will allow the energy transition, we seem to forget the fact that the region depends on the technologies. We are not the ones generating technology. We are not the owners of the technology. How are we even going to pay for that? Where it is the discussion regarding the public ownership of energy and technology? And it goes back to a component which we keep leaving aside. We keep underlooking, and I will disagree with that, which is the role of trade and investment. And there is so much to be done. We need to assess the role of the free trade agreements. Chile has signed so many because we have had an open economy unlike other countries in the region. What are we going to do with the FTAs, and what are going to be the conditions of the different investment agendas in the energy transition? That is a huge challenge, because today we hear public policies where the role of the state is key for the energy transition. We are planning to put in place state-owned companies to extract certain materials, and that leaves the countries, the societies, and also the fiscal possibilities on the verge of international lawsuits from companies that have signed certain agreements with the countries and that are somehow affected in the right to invest and in the right to ownership and to trade. And what they do is to move on to litigate against the state internationally. We talked about this beforehand. States are entering into litigations because there are liabilities of health because workers have had certain impacts. These are all litigations, and we are willfully accepting this. We accept that a company is demanding the state just for putting in place a sovereign public policy of autonomy that has to do with the state ownership or the extraction of a certain material. There is a proposal actually from the Chilean government of creating a public company for lithium, but what are the obstacles for that initiative in terms of the trade and investment agendas? We're not looking at that, and there have been threats in other countries in the region for wanting to put in place an extractive policy of lithium to face climate change. What the global north countries are saying is that everyone is responsible, but it's the companies in the global north that are litigating against the countries in the south. So back to the question and the challenge and the opportunity of multilateralism to go over the discussions. This isn't a discussion that is happening where it should be, which is in the framework agreement of climate change from the UN, and they have not incorporated, up until their latest report, they have not incorporated the obstacle of the investment and commercial agendas towards the energy transition. And the last comment I wanted to make is the impact assessments are key. We cannot move out of social fuels to put in place industries and productive entrepreneurs of extraction of a new mineral without assessing beforehand, without assessing throughout and after what is the impact, not only the economic impact, what is going to be the economic growth. Because of the extraction of that mineral, there will be a social impact, territorial impact, labor impact, gender impact. There will be an impact over the role of the public sector and how the state and public policies will be able to get a piece of that business to invest that into social welfare, because ultimately there will be a planet, but if we have a planet without any rights, we even have a greater problem and we need to start all over again.
Thank you, Natalia, for that.
Gracias de verdad.
I give you my heartfelt thank you. I have taken many notes for myself. You have given us such a rich contribution through your experience. I am a bit sad that there was no exchange with a representative from the European Union, because maybe in the future there could be a greater exchange, and with the help of Eurosocial, we could have complemented your points of view with their coincidences and differences. So we'll lay this open, but in a few minutes, I'd like to touch upon not conclusions, but some key words and concepts that summarize the concept of this and the complexes: participation, dialogue, health. It is intangible that Cecilia mentioned the acknowledgement of labor in the development of a country. What acknowledgement is there? Very few times have I heard mention of this, so it's important that it has been talked about here. I am in law, in a legal framework, so it's important to mention this in a just transition. Also, multilateralism of the role played by the different stakeholders in national legislation, how these is mentioned in the dialogue processes. Again, this challenge, as Claudia was mentioned, how do we work together? How do we solve this together? Also, another interesting aspect to think about of a new paradigm for development. Also, in my words, to leave no one behind. So all three have mentioned the territories, the local, the subnational, which is that is what the panel has to do. So it's important to see that you are working on these aspects. I don't know if I'm leaving something beside, but those words and concepts of challenges for Chile, for the region, for the European Union, and the world. But we need to complement our particular views. I'd like to thank you. And if I might make one question and aim it at all three. We have talked about energy reconversion of the use of coal and to move towards greener energies, greener works, the areas of sacrifice. Often we see the destruction of the social tissue of the communities for the benefit of the state. How do we recover social relationships during these transitions in these territories? How do we do this? When we recover social relations as a whole, working together, having dialogue, making decisions together, and recovering technologies, but as an alliance together, not being enemies, but rather being allies with the state to bring forward this territory. That is the only way to move forward. Briefly, Claudio, first, I agree fully. The ecosocial crisis in Chile and probably a global world, well, we see charity would have the reflection. How do we rebuild trust between the different sectors. Here, let's talk about sacrificed areas, because this stigmatizes people and creates discrimination towards those people where industries were built. So we need to be careful with the use of words, because that too creates an issue. When we talk vulnerabilities, you stigmatize people who live in a vulnerable area. We need to be careful with the use of those words. We need to build together governances that help identify the trust of the ideas, of the activities, what can be done in an area. We have seen this in the past. This sector has probably have been affected a lot by this. We see that the ministries have approached this area, these sectors. We need to rebuild here. So to all together, having a dialogue and working together can rebuild, but taking care of how we use our words and with a look at the trajectory we share. If I may just add a little bit, a little grain of sand, the Latin American and Caribbean area is one of the areas in which we have seen a greater conflict. The defense of the territories is the target of this. We see you're killing people because they're defending their territory, their common goods. This is in the rise. We see a increase in the killing of people who are defending what they have. So rebuilding those areas has to do with making this more visible, to acknowledge the fact, and also increase the public policies, the management of the territories with the communities. But we need to acknowledge that in our countries, in our regions, there are deaths, but for defending social rights, union rights, territories, and shared goods. And that is not just my opinion, that is a fact, it's a reality. Thank you for that. We'd like to thank Beatriz and each of the participants. Of course, time is our common enemy, but this has been an exercise of social dialogue. You have grounded us, you have identified challenges and the strengths of social dialogue. In the last section of this area, I'd like to invite the following panelists who are to join Talia of the University of Turin in Italy. Andrea, several of the panelists will be online, if I may, if they can make the presentation. Good afternoon. We are waiting still for one person, but we will start given the time. In Europe, it's already dinner time, so if we could move forward, make it fun and light. During this panel, we will tackle the impact economy. What do we understand by this concept, and why we need to set forth this aspect during this seminar. In this impact economy, we talk about public of the private initiative, whether from businesses and industries that are seeking profitability, but also a positive impact at social and environmental areas. We see social economies, B-type companies, even triple impact companies that seek the growth, economic growth, sustainability in terms of the environment and the social aspect. Before, we heard about the new paradigms of development. We see the impact economy is just a niche, but has a potential of being broadened and hopefully become a mainstream subject. It represents a new development paradigm. In that sense, it can be an ally for public and social policies in pursuit of these goals for the climate, energy transitions, as well as social justice. We'll talk with some speakers who are here and also online. First, we'll listen from Giovanni Melandri, who is acknowledged in Italy. She was a former minister of the government in Italy. She founded a Human Foundation. It's a think tank that works on this matter and social impact agenda for Italy. We also have Filippo Montesi has been patiently waiting. And from the Human Foundation, we have the General Secretary. He has been working during these years with the social program to support certain governments in Latin America regarding impact economies. We're also joined by this personality from the Ministry of Economy from Brazil, Secretary of the Impact Economies for the public policies that promotes impact business in Brazil, and Barbieri from Uruguay. She is an expert from Eurosocial. She works with this subject in Uruguay, and together with Eurosocial, she has been mapping social and public policies that promote businesses in terms of impact to see what is happening in the region. We'll first hear from Mr. Melandri, who will give us an overview of what is understood by impact economies and the challenges we face to escalate this from a niche to a mainstream potential.
Let me first of all express my gratitude for
Primero
having
quisiera
been
darles
invited
gracias
by
por
Eurosocial
la
to this
invitación de
gathering. I
Eurosocial
am
en esta
also very sorry that I
reunión.
cannot be
Yo
with you
lamento
present,
no estar con
but I
ustedes
will
de
use
cuerpo
these
presente,
few
pero
minutes to
si me permiten unos minutos
introduce
para
very briefly
introducir
the
muy
topic and
brevemente
the
el tema
importance of
y la
the impact
importancia de
economy
las economías de
and
impacto
of the impact economy tools
y las herramientas de
in
impactos
this moment,
en
in this,
este
I would
momento
say, syndemic
y
crisis,
en esta
which is
crisis sindémica.
really asking an
En
important
realidad está
change in
planteando un
public
cambio muy
policies,
importante
in
en las
market
políticas
regulations,
públicas, en las regulaciones de
and in
mercado
social infrastructure.
y en las
What
infraestructuras
I found
sociales.
many years ago when
Hace
I
años,
founded
cuando
Human
yo
Foundation, extremely
fundé
interesting
esta
about the
Human
concept and the
Foundation, el
paradigm of
concepto y
impact
paradigma
economy and
de las
impact
economías de
investment
impacto e
is the
inversión
fact that
es
it
el hecho que de
somehow
alguna manera
integrates and
integra
overlooks
y
at
pasa por alto
all the
y ve por
transitions that
encima las
we need to
transiciones
address.
que deben ser
We need to address
abordadas.
obviously the
Por
climate and
supuesto, hay
energy
que ver
transition,
las
and
transiciones
we
de
need to address
energía
this
y
transition
clima.
since many, many years. I
Deberíamos haberlo
still
hecho hace
recall when
mucho.
in
Yo recuerdo
1992
cuando en
I was leading the
1992 yo
environmental
lideraba
delegation,
la
TAG environmental
integración
delegation to the Rio Summit.
energética a la cumbre de
Nearly 30
Río.
years have gone
Han pasado ya
by.
casi 30 años y aún estamos hablando sobre el cambio climático. Hay que acelerar esta transición. Debe ser más rápida de lo que hemos visto en las últimas décadas. Habiendo dicho esto, hay que integrar las transiciones sociales porque los desafíos de la relocalización de la mano de obra es importante. Y, por supuesto, hay muchos temas sociales asociados con el mercado de trabajo y el acceso al mercado de trabajo, al mundo laboral, como por ejemplo las mujeres que habían sido dejadas de lado del mundo laboral. Lo que yo quisiera enfatizar es que para mí el paradigma de las economías de impacto es una estrategia respecto a la forma en que valoramos y cómo asociamos valor a las empresas, a los emprendimientos y a los sistemas de economía. A través de las herramientas concretas de estas economías de impacto, podemos mover los valores desde el sector público. Quisiera mencionar algo más. Hay que tener políticas públicas que son redirigidas hacia la definición y los sistemas de valor de lo social, económico, medioambiental, género, local, territorial, regional. Todos estos aspectos deben ser abordados por las políticas públicas que ayuden a crear empresas y participantes partes interesadas que incorporan todas estas economías de impacto. Y para hacer esto, para cambiar la manera en que en el mercado de capitales se asignan los recursos, necesitamos herramientas para medir el impacto. Y son la infraestructura de intangibles necesaria para crear este mercado. Permítanme decirles que en los últimos 8 a 10 años se han visto cambios en general en el mundo. Si nos fijamos en la asignación de activos, en la gestión en el mundo, hay aproximadamente 40 trillones de dólares asignados en las GSD que no son de impacto. Y hay aproximadamente, hay muchos datos, pero aproximadamente 1.5 a 2 billones de dólares inversionados en las inversiones de impacto. Si consideramos que después del la crisis financiera del 2008-2009, hablamos de cifras menores, hay una tendencia más positiva, pero hay que asegurarse que esta tendencia se relaciona con transparencia, integridad y la capacidad de definir las normas para la evaluación de impacto que son comunes y que pueden ayudarnos a enfrentar las inversiones. Lo que en realidad queremos es generar herramientas que motivan a los empresarios de impacto para influenciar las organizaciones económicas en economías de oferta y demanda que integren sus sistemas de valores, no solamente los riesgos y de ganancias, pero también de su impacto. eso es lo que estamos defendiendo en Human Foundation Italy y lo que estamos defendiendo a nivel mundial para las inversiones que se organiza bajo las asociaciones que se fijan en los impactos. Nos estamos fijando la integridad. Hay mucho lavado de no solamente inversiones de género, porque queremos una revolución, queremos ver un cambio real al mercado capitalista que no reconoce, no integra estos valores. Hay que ser muy cuidadosos al asegurarse que la forma en que medimos el impacto social, ambiental, económico es en serio.
También quiero destacar el hecho de que es algo especialmente nuevo. Yo sé que lo estamos discutiendo aquí en América del Sur y en ese ecosistema, pero si analizamos lo que ha sucedido en Europa, por ejemplo, con las regulaciones que regulan el financiamiento sustentable y toda la discusión que tiene que ver con la taxonomía, nos hemos concentrado mucho en la E de la ESG, nos hemos concentrado mucho en el medio ambiente, la energía y mucho menos. Me parece que esto es algo que debemos solucionar de manera muy rápida cuando hablamos de la S, de la parte social, del cumplimiento, del sistema de cumplimiento de ESG. No habrá energía, no habrá una transición ecológica sin una transición justa a nivel social. Y lo que es muy relevante y muy importante y especial acerca de las herramientas para la evaluación medioambiental, incluso nosotros las utilizamos en la Human Foundation, es que ven todos los impactos de manera integrada. La energía, el ciclo de materiales, estamos mirando también el impacto social y pienso que es algo muy especial e imprescindible ver estas herramientas que nos pueden ayudar a definir y diseñar políticas sociales que son innovadoras. Para nosotros lo que es muy relevante es el resultado social, mucho más que el tipo de organización que produzca dicho resultado o que defina dicho resultado. Me parece que es un gran ámbito de, ¿cómo decirlo?, de crear colaboraciones entre el mundo público, privado y el tercer sector o el sector sin fines de lucro. No sé de qué otra manera podríamos llamarlo. Pero me parece que hay una gran área para crear políticas que conecten a los emprendedores sociales, a los emprendedores en general, a nivel local. Muchas de las herramientas que existen en esta caja de herramientas del movimiento de inversión de impacto son herramientas que tienen que ver con este tipo de diseño, que tienen que ver con hacer una ingeniería de colaboración público-privada y social. Y es un desafío para todas las partes interesadas. Es un desafío también para el primer sector, para las ONGs, para las organizaciones sin fines de lucro que deben ser, entre comillas, juzgadas por sus resultados que puedan ofrecer. Y es un desafío para el sector público también, que utiliza herramientas como, por ejemplo, modelos de impacto social u otros fondos que por lo tanto se ven obligadas a definir su eficiencia y la capacidad que tienen de entregar resultados concretos que conectan los resultados de sus políticas y la eficiencia de sus políticas con los resultados que deben ser medidos. Y eso era lo que yo quería compartir con ustedes. Era solo una introducción bastante general a nuestro trabajo, al trabajo de la Fundación en Italia y al grupo en general en todo el mundo y al movimiento de impacto en todo el mundo. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. Well, Filippo Montesi, I think it would be interesting if you could please complement the words of Giovanna Melandri. I would like to highlight maybe one key word that I think is interesting, which is the exit strategy. She used that word from the current development model. She also talked about this trend of the impact economy in the world and the major challenges. Filippo, would you like to complement those comments or respond to that? And Giovanna talked about the tools, about the instruments, about public policies in order to create an impact ecosystem. What are you doing in the European Union? What is going on about this? Well, thank you so much, Andrea, for the invitation to this interesting and very important conference. Good morning, everyone. Well, Giovanna talked about the exit strategy, and actually, it is a very urgent matter. If we think this carefully, we are 8 years away from 2030, and still, the Sustainable Development Goals are far, far away from being achieved. So we need an exit strategy, and we need it badly, especially now at this time in the middle of a pandemic, a war going on not only in Ukraine, but also many other wars that are going on in the world, and they are hindering the progress that has been made in the world in terms of social inequality, poverty, economic inequality, and also the expansion of equitable opportunities. And this is something that we have heard beforehand in the other presentations. So the leaders of the business and political world are taking the responsibility with the purpose of giving real answers to the challenges of climate change, of social and economic inequalities. And it is key that the governments value this and also take the risk of innovating, the political risk, and also the risk in some cases of trying something different that maybe goes against common sense in order to put in place the conditions and the federal policies for an economy which is guided not only by economic or financial performance, but also social and environmental impact, which is positive. So the governments may take on different roles: the role of regulation, the role of facilitation, and the role of participation in the markets. In this sense, the European Union has taken a very important leadership in the issues of sustainability from the regulatory perspective, and it has developed the European guidelines for the environmental taxonomy, which defines which are the economic activities that can be considered sustainable, and it also establishes a regulation of dissemination in terms of sustainable finances that makes it mandatory for those that participate in financial markets to offer final investors the information regarding the objectives and or features of sustainability of the financial products. And soon enough, we will have a guideline for corporate sustainability reports that will be aimed at major companies, larger companies, but also SMEs that are traded in the stock exchange market. These are examples of standards or guidelines that represent a starting point towards sustainability that will help us improve transparency and also the competence of the different stakeholders in a clear situation for everyone. Also, the European Union has developed an action plan for the social economy where the European Commission supports the development of social economy and a solidary economy, qualifying this as a strategic industrial sector. This is a byproduct. It is part of the industrial strategy. The plan is not limited to just injecting financial resources, as important as they may be, for instance, through public procurement, a special or a specific financial instruments, but it also offers opportunities for the development of capabilities in the companies in areas of sustainable businesses and also impact measurement. Now, generally speaking, under the umbrella of the Green Deal, as it was explained earlier by our colleagues Sebastiano and Mateo, another relevant part of the next generation EU resources and also the financial framework that sometimes we forget, but it is a very important source of funding, are oriented towards companies and investments with an impact. More particularly, there is a facility, Invest EU, that makes a bet on promoting the impact investment towards companies that pursue a social objective and also an environmental objective. There is still a lot to do, and public policies are key for this design. For instance, in many countries in Europe, let's say France, the Netherlands, Portugal, they are experimenting, scaling up mechanisms of financing based on results, thanks to the role of the governments both at the national and local level. They play this role of outcome payer based on changes, transforming very deeply the culture and the administrative structure towards the impact measurement. So it isn't only something that comes from the Anglo-Saxon culture, but we also see these type of approaches in countries like France, Portugal. Surely in Spain in the following years they will go through these mechanisms as well. In Italy, there is another interesting example of a policy, which is the reform of the third sector that we have gone through in the latest years that defined legally the social company model, foreseeing or provisioning fiscal benefits for those investments, and also previously it was legally defined what is a model for green companies. And one last example of an interesting public policy, at least from my perspective, is the model in France, where many years ago they have defined a legislation that requires from corporate plans managers to offer at least one pension product that invests from 5 to 10% of the assets in social companies. And this has radically changed the sustainable finance market in France. So these are only examples of good practices that could be applied with the necessary adjustments in other environments, but definitely this is necessary but not enough. We also have not only to work on the policies but also transform the paradigms. So we need to generate policies that are oriented towards channeling more financial resources towards, for instance, the SDGs and the zero net transition processes in order to leave no one behind. We need the agreements of the G7 and G20 to be more robust, because the success in facing the challenges of climate change and inequalities does not depend on the addition of the actions of each country, but of the synergy that is achieved in global agreements in this sense. And with this, I will wrap up my presentation. I think the goal where we will determine most of the ecological footprint, actually the global north, where most of the footprint is accounted for. It should be made responsible, and it should benefit those that are in the southern area where they are paying the toll for this. And also we should consider the interests of the consumers and producers of fossil fuels, for instance. On the other hand, the southern countries are responsible for not repeating the mistakes that we have made in the global north, repeating in this manner an unsustainable economy. So in general, we should not only change the policies, but also change the paradigms, the objectives, in order to achieve a real change. And if we don't change this, it is going to be very difficult to see a future change. If the objective of our economies is just to reproduce financial gains, how do we even think that the economy will produce gains at all costs? So this isn't only an issue of investment, it is an issue of the culture, the mindset, and the values as well. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some comments. Thank you so much, Filippo. Now I'd like to give the floor to the Latin American side. He has given us the European perspective, and also we've heard about what to do to exchange among both areas. Luca, in Brazil, the impact of the main public policies. What is the role of public policies in Brazil? What are the main challenges that you have ahead of yourselves in order to try to have in the same strategy economic growth, environmental and social sustainability? Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation. It's very good to see you again, Andrea, and being with Maria, two people that I really like and that I really admire. And I am happy to see you here, and I'm happy to be back to be here in person after so long. And I will start apologizing for this mix of Spanish and Portuguese. Apologies. I have this difficulty as a Portuguese speaker. You asked about the role of the public policies in the incentives to the impact investments in Brazil. I think that public policies are key in order to create what Giovanna mentioned earlier, to create the impact economy. It is key that the state plays a role in this. And when we hear some people talking about investment or impact investment, we hear some common words in order to maximize the role of the market and private initiative when it comes to the changes that need to happen. And I think we have to be careful with this, because I think the state and the public policies have a key role to play throughout the process. And I will share with you a piece of information. If we take all the expenditures in social policies and environmental policies in countries of the OECD, it is more or less $11 trillion. The impact investments are more or less $1 trillion, which is below 10%. So the public policies will have and will continue to have a key role to play in the changes in the environmental social processes, period. However, it doesn't mean that there isn't room for collaboration with private entities and with changes in the market. I think that this is also key. That is why I'm here talking about impact investments. There is room for collaboration, definitely, between the state, the public policies, philanthropists, private initiatives, and I believe that impact investments are an innovative and creative way of making those changes. And several countries have done policies to promote impact assessments in the world. Some countries, for instance, Brazil, have created a national policy, as the case of the institution that I coordinate. Other countries have created regulations to promote impact investments, as it is the case in the US, Colombia, Canada, with their big regulations, and others. Other countries have created agencies to promote this. For instance, the case of the United Kingdom, where they created a bank, big society capital, in order to promote impact investments. The message that I'm trying to get across is that there are different ways in which the state can promote impact investments, and they are happening in different manners all over the world. Well, I think that it is important to talk about the case of Brazil because I think it's important, and a huge innovation in Brazil was the creation of the institution that I coordinate in Brazil, and impact that has managed to achieve major progress in this area in spite of the difficult context that we have in Brazil. I mean the political situation, I mean the environmental, the financial situation. In spite of all the difficulties that we may have in Brazil, in spite of all those issues, the organization has been able to, in 4 years, triple the impact businesses in Brazil and multiply by 4 the impact investments in Brazil. And also Eurosocial has a key role to play. We have a partnership that we have created for 4 years, and they are partly responsible for this. So one aspect that I think is key and that I want to highlight is that innovation that was made in Brazil is the governance structure of a public policy in impact. The organization is an articulation from different public entities, from the presidency, the Ministry of Economy, the 3 largest public federal banks, among other public stakeholders, and 10 stakeholders from the civil society and private initiatives. And a very important point is that the civil society stakeholders and also private entities have a leadership role within our institution, and they have been able to mobilize an entire ecosystem and to obtain huge results. So a message is this: the governance arrangement needs to be innovative with the participation of the citizens, with the participation of the private sector, has the ability to achieve many things. The second dimension that I want to highlight is the role of our articulation in Latin America. We are working together with Eurosocial, for instance. We are trying to create a network, a Latin American network of public managers that work with impact. We have worked with 6 countries already, and we are having a conversation regarding what is the role of the state in the promotion of impact assessment in the region. We are only at the beginning of this journey, but I think that the region could have a great benefit with the more coordinated action among the governments, with more articulation, having more information, exchanging information regarding the impact assessment, impact investments in the region, what are the companies like in the region, and also attracting investment that is going on in the world. And finally, I don't want to be naive and I don't want to be foolish, but I do think that things are changing, and happily they are changing for the positive, for the better. And I want to mention a couple of changes that are happening. For instance, when I hear the CEO of the World Economic Forum talking about the need of having a new capitalism which is necessary and possible, I think that things are changing, because the World Economic Forum is not known for talking in this way. Also, when I hear the Pope Francis in the Vatican in Italy with his economy of Francisco talking about the need of involving the private initiative and changing how the goods are produced and distributed across the world, and talking about things that are similar to what the CEO of the World Economic Forum, I know that things are changing. When I hear the ministers of the G20, of the 20 largest economies, talking about the importance of impact investments to achieve the goals of the SDGs, I think, or even more, the UN itself, with the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, acknowledging the role of the private initiative and the process of change, I see that things are changing. And it is necessary to consider the dimension of the urgency that we are in. The environmental context, the social context is severe. The speakers before me highlighted this already. It is not possible that we live in a world where in the middle of a pandemic, billionaires increased their fortune in $1.8 trillion when everyone else were decreasing or were seeing their income reduced. We continue to produce goods and services with a highly carbonized energy matrix without making any changes. There is an urgency and changes need to happen. And in this process of change, it is urgent that the private initiative and that the markets participate in the process. The process cannot continue on under the sole responsibility of the state's public policies and philanthropists. It is necessary for other stakeholders to be part of the process, and I think that impact investments are a good way to do this.
Lucas, entonces.
Thank you so much, Lucas. So now the question goes over to Maria. What is happening in Latin America in this process of escalating this type of economy? What are the key points and where can we focus on when trying to move forward? First, I'd like to greet everybody, thank this panel. Given where we are, the University Alberto Hurtado was suggesting a phrase everybody knows. If you're facing something that is large and generous, do not hesitate. Be happy for the trajectory. Victory is at hand. Something similar can be said for other areas because we see a confluence of different institutions that are being pushed, motivated by what is surrounding them. So many companies want to change their business model. They want to be involved in the community in a different way and in the environment as well. The economies, as you were saying, and even many of the initiatives that you are acquainted with, the impact economy, the regeneration economy, recycling, the triple impact companies, the fourth sector, social companies, other countries are emphasizing these in their public policies. We have made a study with Rosina and Natalia. They're following us online. These studies show a differential progress. Some countries have strategy, have a more systemic, integrating view of their public policies that come together to move forward. And in other countries, these initiatives are scattered within the organizations. When we talk about these initiatives that go back to 10 years, it's a rather recent history. We see an interesting growth of these. Let's see, 2007 in the US, now they have 4,000 BE companies, about 700 are in the region, but it has been a significant growth in this recent years. What initiatives are arising that could be included in this impact economy? Some are related to the generation and recording of businesses. How do you assess impact economies? Others have to do with how to harness investments and the capital, and how this public and private capital is channeled to these policies and generate different instruments to increase impact economy. Now, the ecosystems, all the incubation systems, all the formations, all the intermediaries that are trying to strengthen the companies are also important in our region. Also, what is most known, perhaps, is the institutionality. How do you develop a legal framework? Countries are trying to develop this aspect because they lack innovative legal frameworks. I'm currently working closely with the companies to learn and to propose changes. And from this more public area, I know it is difficult to generate change in companies and in universities if you lack tools and legal frameworks. These frameworks are let me look up. These frameworks, the big interest laws that were approved in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, with bills in Chile, and laws that are promoting the fourth sector. We see debates in Mexico, Argentina. This is an axis of public policy tools, and there are others related with investment tools. We see bonds in view of the eco-social transition, as Filippo was mentioning. We see the green bonds, the social bonds, the OECD bonds. So we see a connection of the public and the private sector regarding the funding that is being generated when there are data and proof of what is achieved. With the sustainable public purchase laws, we see a public purchase as a significant drive of responsible policy. We need to see a transition in this type of tools. So this is an opportunity. Also, the tax incentives. So if you're differentiating tax between companies that are directed at a greater or smaller impact in terms of the social, environmental, and economical aspects. So I'd like to highlight the experience of Brazil. It is most commendable because you can identify multiple initiatives, but one area of strategic development that is very systemic, many assessments, constant adjustments. And let's see, 2017 to 2027 is the period under assessment and development. So it's a full period, not just point evaluation. We see some regulations, legal frameworks, acceleration. These are all specific concepts, but they need to be integrated so that we have the state, but also the market, and we have regulation that is controlling the fulfillment of the standards needed to be a company, an entrepreneur, or investment of impact. I also want to mention that we identified some opportunity fields, some areas where one can see opportunities. What happens if you have impact economies and investments? We have a concern for the washing. How much is real, concrete, sustainable change? And then we have assessments, certifications, and accreditations that are a large part of the subject under debate. We are identifying hybrid certification systems in which there's not only private certification, but you also have public area has a role in terms of certification. This would be more motivating them to be more transparent and more strict. We know it is different in the area. We have large regulatory bodies, and accountability is left sort of to the side. Now we see some opportunities in terms of work on public budget, in terms of the results of outcomes. You know that public budget has to do with activities for investment and operations. Seems that investment of impact investment that cannot be measured, it cannot show results or costs. So it's very difficult to duplicate and escalate. So it's not very transparent. So this is an opportunity. There can be a development associated for the development of these investments. Also, we see an opportunity in terms of the territorial development. We see there is no global sustainability if the local sustainability is not tackled first. We have to see sustainability managed at a local area, otherwise we are losing out on the risks and also the challenges and the assets that are available, the know-how, the skills, the resources that should drive forward the change. We cannot talk about those who are stigmatized, but those who are at risk, because the public policies can make change together with associated companies, together with the social sectors, with the workers and other institutions that are affected by these changes. But we also see some territories with advantages because of some success and advantages. They'll generate risks that entail a specific public policy development. Finally, the socio-economic public policies are difficult to take hold in our region, not just in terms of organization and the structure, but also how to develop these public policies. So the social, economic, and environmental impact is affected. So generating innovation in the social, environmental aspect seems to be an almost urgent line of work in order to generate change in these areas. Unfortunately, we won't be able to go in depth here. Thank you for giving us, in broad strokes, your opinion, Maria. And upon hearing you, it seems that things are moving forward. That is good. Of course, we still have some minutes left to this panel. We heard from Giovanna Marilandri and Maria. There's a lot of washing. You need to be careful. You have to measure the impact. The companies that are formed as impact companies and economies, they need to be observed and assessed. Also, I like to hear about the systemic mission they need to have. We're not talking about scattered, dispersed, or standalone initiatives. We need to bring together public policies, other stakeholders to generate a systemic approach and generate development, as Lucas was saying, and other speakers. That is what humankind has to do. I'd like to thank Filippo from Italy, Giovanna Milandri, who recorded her presentation, Lucas and Marias for coming here and talking to us in Chile. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. We'll change the scenario here. We'll close the seminar from this point with the director of the university, with Gloria Arredondo, who leads this social sector. We'll first hear from Gloria and then from the director. I'd like to point to 4 ideas by way of a conclusion that we want to share, particularly the brave who have remained to the last. First, thanks to the university for joining us here and for staying to the very last. Thanks to the speakers who have joined us and shared their experience. We have some conclusions that will be uploaded. We have taken notes and we're trying to include them in a document that help us analyze and move forward. It will be uploaded to the website Plaza Social that was posted earlier. I'd like to highlight a few ideas. First, we are making transitions. There's no question about it. There's no other way. We need to have transitions. They have to lead us to more sustainable, and these social costs need to be controlled from public policies. We need to control that people have the possibilities of opportunities to cover these negative impacts that these transitions will have. However, full transitions need to be placed in a context of proactivity. These transitions, in the second panel, was seen, and in the third, having to the economical models, we see these create opportunities. We see that happening now, but we have to be careful because opportunities need to reach everybody and not just the elite of the country, but everybody. And here we need social policy. We need to identify them, we need to strengthen them, and then make them universal. The best example was shown by Cecilia from the Ministry of Energy. The workers earned over 1.5 million, and so they could not benefit from the policies directed to the most vulnerable. So we need to redefine what is a wage, what is a dignified job. So employment leads to learning and skill development over time. So these policies need to set themselves in a context of environmental, energy, economic, etc. aspects, as stated by European and Latin American scientists and specialists. I invite everybody to visit our website. I thank you all again. Remember, we are walking together along these transitions. No matter if we are workers, decision makers, or simple communities. This is a challenge we all face, so the invitation we are making from Eurosocial, we need to rethink public and social policies in this respect.
Gloria.
Thank you so much, Gloria. In order to finalize the seminar, we want to thank everyone in the room, and also we want to remind you that we have over 200 people that have been joining us from Europe, Latin America, and elsewhere, from our virtual channels, from our digital channel, from the university, and also the streaming that we have made available. Thank you once again, everyone. And to finalize, we will listen to the rector of the university. Feel free to remove your mask. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. I want to thank the Eurosocial program from the European Union, the Agency of International Cooperation, the ILO, the government that has been present here through the Ministry of Energy, Social Development, and also the Ministry of Labor. I want to thank the university, represented here by our Center of Public Policies, and also want to thank you for showing us the reality that we owe ourselves to in different ways, with the social environmental crisis, with inequalities, with poverty, with all the challenges that we see around us. I am sort of a philosopher, and there is an historian, Michel Desserteau, who said that things can be done when there is a dialogue between the world of intelligence, the world of politics, and the world of the poor. When those three entities are there, there is definitely something to be done. And that is what we have been doing today. The policymakers, with the urgency, they need the scientific evidence, they need the times of the academia that are fairly slower to find data and evidence. And that is what the universities are doing in a different manner. We have challenges, of course, of implementation throughout our gender perspective, to overcome the gaps, to overcome discrimination. Our university works on that. But to implement the gender perspective, we saw that we needed to publish books and novels from Chilean writers. And we have republished 8 books, and there are different stories, and we believe that with that, in a different manner, we are collaborating with the gender equality. We've not talked about this directly, of course, but the Mapuche people has a relationship with the Chilean state, which is an issue that concerns everyone. Yesterday, we were concerned with launching a book from a priest from the 17th century, Diego Rosales, who, together with other members who came from Peru, and they came to Chile, and they spoke Mapudungun, and they invented the war, which was about acknowledging the Mapuche people in its authority and engaging in a dialogue. So the academia has different ways of making a contribution, and this joint between the work of intellectuals, the work of policymakers, facing the challenges that we have ahead of ourselves in terms of this social environmental justice. Thank you for participating. Thank you for coming to our university.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias al rector.
Thank you so much, Rector. Thank you, Gloria. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you to the panel members, the speakers, the attendees. We want to invite you to enjoy a coffee break. We won't know if it's enough to replace lunch, but just for us to share outside the room. Also, I want to tell you that in a little while, we are going to have a conversation here with young students that have been joining us throughout the morning, and we want to talk to them from their experience. What do they think about this conversation, and what are their proposals and their assessment, and what opinion they have? So once again, thank you for following us online. And as Interdisciplinary Center on Public Policies from the university, we hope to be as an instance for dialogue between the academia, the society, and the world. Thank you, everyone.